Chapter 539. The undead's continuous retreat seemed to be a declaration of the living's victory. However, the ominous mana fluctuations seemed to be announcing that everything wasn't over yet. Of course, for the great majority of people, the undead's retreat was already a joyous victory. In fact, some brave individuals were even considering whether or not to chase after the undead. While everyone else in Starwood City was celebrating their victory, a certain section of the city walls mysteriously became uninhabited. Alright then, nobody here was an idiot. Those twisting murderous vines were more effective than anything else. Even the higher-ups of the defending army didn't dare to come look for Roland. There, two women were staring at each other. They had once been master and disciple, and they had once been comrades in an antisocial dark organization. But now, the two of them had a falling out over a single man. If you have the ability to steal a man, why don't you have the ability to open the door? Why do I feel like I'll be in big trouble if I make such a comment? Actually, I had always treated the so-called aura of a powerful individual as a joke. Those legendary stories about being able to crush an enemy's will and resistance with a single glance were nothing more than some dirty mental magic that bewitched the enemy in order to make themselves look better. But now I believed it. At the very least, in this atmosphere where two women were fighting against each other, my survival instincts told me that the best way to survive was to shut up. But why did I have such a strong desire to crack a joke to liven up the atmosphere in such a situation? Could it be that I was really a joke character? No, you're just passionate about seeking death. Some creatures have self-destructive tendencies from the very start. My system's comment was as helpless as ever. But before I could retort, I heard Harloise say something else. Roland, stop being a bystander. Prove my words. Do you want your lies to be exposed? I'm helping you. As long as you pretend to be together with me, you'll naturally have a reason to refuse Amelia and the others. I already know what you want. Are you really willing to go back to being a good family man? Besides, even if I'm lying to you, will I be able to restrict you? We're a magical pet contract, and you're the master. Hearing this, I thought about it more and more and felt that it made more and more sense. It seemed that no matter what happened, I wouldn't be at a disadvantage. And so, I gritted my teeth and spoke through our soul connection. Fine, I owe you a favor this time. I then prepared my words. Ordinary lies would be meaningless to Amelia. After a long while, I finally thought of what I should say. There were some words that I should have said long ago. Senpai, I actually know how you feel about me, and I'm very touched. However, the previous marriage proposals were all misunderstandings. Actually, I don't treat you as a woman. I treat you as a brother. That doesn't seem right. What I mean is, instead of treating you as a man of the opposite sex, it's better to treat you as a confidant, a brother who can talk to me about anything, a brother who can search for the essence of the soul and the truth of the world together. Some words were spoken with some hesitation, but once they were spoken, the more they were spoken, the more real and smoother they became. Perhaps it was because there were many things that he usually didn't think about, and the process of saying it out was a process of questioning his own heart. And the process of saying it out wasn't just to convince the other party, it was also to convince himself. I've thought it through. Perhaps this was just a misunderstanding or a harmless joke, but I've already hurt you. Sometimes, the longer something is delayed, the greater the damage. I'm sorry, I should have said these words a long time ago. It's all my fault. If you want to take revenge, come. I know. When I worked up the courage to refuse, what greeted me wasn't vines locking me down or vicious questions. Instead, it was a casual answer. The green-haired witch smiled, as if she had long since desired such an answer. Of course, Amelia knew what Roland was thinking. As a soul reader, Roland's thoughts that even he didn't understand were all revealed to her. Before she fell asleep, the only thing that prevented her from making a decision, the only thing that she never saw through, was her own feelings. After waking up from her long sleep, Amelia had already understood her own feelings. She had long since come to a decision that wouldn't be influenced by others. Now, even though she simultaneously received a friend card, a good person card, and a rejection card from the 10 emotions, it doesn't matter what you think from the very start. The next instant, a wondrous feeling transmitted to me from my spine couldn't compare to the witch's brilliant sunflower-like smile. Amelia smiled. Her lips were arched upwards, and her blood-red eyes were filled with passion like flames. Her faint smile was like a spring breeze, but also like a quietly blooming flower. The green-haired witch gently caressed my face. She blushed as if she was a young girl experiencing her first awakening of love. However, she lowered her head and left her mark on my cheek. I could feel the softness of her kiss mark. It was likely that it would take a long time for her to wash it off. I like you, and I want to be together with you. That's enough. Amelia's gentle smile was right in front of me. However, when I suddenly touched my cheek and pinched it again to confirm that I wasn't dreaming, as expected, it doesn't hurt. Dream on. I told you that my senpai couldn't possibly smile in such a cute manner. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Relax. My waist, my waist. Didn't I lose feeling long ago? Why does it hurt so much? Her smile is so scary. She really is my senpai. The next instant, the gentleness from earlier vanished without a trace. The sudden pain made me feel rather helpless. However, not only did Amelia's evil gaze give me a headache, it also locked onto my cat. This time, Amelia was still smiling brilliantly, but she gave me a completely different feeling. Earlier, she was still a young girl. Now, just looking at her caused me to feel a chill down my spine. She was just like a murderer who was about to greet me with death. Then, what do you think of that thieving cat? Since you said that you eloped with her, you should have a reason, right? Don't say that I didn't warn you. That cat is extraordinarily sly, and her feelings for you might not be as great as you think. Think about your future. Do you intend to obediently go back to being a househusband, or continue being a happy single person? Think about what you just promised me. Think about what you still haven't finished. Even if Harlois didn't remind me about the contract, I still knew what to say. I didn't want to be randomly torn apart by vines or fed to man-eating flowers. It would be far too embarrassing to be an epic hero who died from domestic violence. Silly cat. I'm so happy to be together with her. While I did my best to think of what I should say, I discovered that I had never viewed the silly cat as a woman. Even though we had been separated for over 100 years, it seemed that our reunion had also begun with us killing each other. A female lead who's been torn apart by humans the moment she appears? This seems so familiar. Chapter 540. What should I say next? Teach me. I looked over at her pleadingly, but there was no response. Hey, give me a hint. My eyes bulged, but there was still no response. This silly cat who had transformed into a gold elf actually pretended not to see anything. I can't even watch this anymore. What else can she say about something like this? Decide for yourself. Only now did I discover that all women in the world were family. When it came to a critical moment, I couldn't count on anyone. You have to express your affection for the silly cat? TSK, you have to be real. No, isn't this what Beifong should do? When humans were forced to their limits, they would really do anything. For example, even if I was sending off a colleague or classmate I didn't have a good relationship with, I would still be able to squeeze out some sad lines after drinking a few cups of wine. Now that my life was at stake, I really did manage to squeeze out some words after racking my brain. Actually, I'm quite happy when I'm together with her. She understands everything I say. I understand everything she says. No matter if it's good or bad, she has someone to accompany me. She has someone to listen to me when I'm unhappy. She has someone to encourage me when I'm lacking confidence. Even if it's just a comment or a laugh, it'll at least make me feel better. I did my best to search for the silly cat's strengths in my memories. My stuttering became smoother and smoother as I spoke. It was as if I had been waiting countless days to say these words in my heart, and I just happened to have the opportunity to say them today. Also, sometimes you do things that others can't understand. In fact, when the people you're protecting hate you, she understands and will even comfort me and tell jokes to make me happy. Actually, I thought that I was already used to being alone with other people's fearful and hateful gazes. But now I discovered that even I want someone to understand me, believe in me, and support me. I don't know what this feeling is. Calling it love is probably an exaggeration. Perhaps it's because it's difficult to return to loneliness after getting used to someone else's warmth. When I think about how she'll accompany me forever, that I won't be as lonely as before, that she'll accompany me to joke with me, do stupid things with me, and deal with troubles with me, I feel rather happy. At the very least, I've had less pressure in the past 2 years. I've also had someone to fool around with me. These have been the happiest 2 years of my life. Well, I'm not sure either. I think I want her to be by my side forever. Unknowingly, his words became more and more logical, while Harloise lowered her head lower and lower. Finally, when she lowered her head to look at the ground, her pointy ears were completely red. After I said those final words, an ambiguous silence replaced the tense atmosphere. Large beads of sweat appeared on my forehead as I anxiously stomped my feet. Both of us maintained a strange silence. When I recalled what I had just said, even I felt that it was rather corny. My eyes darted around, intending to find a hole to hide in. However, Amelia's bindings suddenly loosened, and I instantly regained my freedom. The curse has been lifted? What made me even more delighted was that the weakening curse had disappeared without a trace. In a short period of time, my body's stats had greatly increased. I had actually recovered to my peak combat strength. What surprised me even more was that not only was Amelia not angry, she even smiled. She walked to the side and summoned the wood spirit to ask about the battle situation. While I felt that this scene was rather strange, I secretly heaved a sigh of relief. If this had continued, Timlad would have truly died. If Timlad died in the ruins because of such a private matter, even I would feel guilty, at least for several minutes. Meanwhile, in a place unknown to Roland, the women's discussion hadn't ended yet. Their mental spell communication was filled with the smell of gunpowder. Sly teacher, even if you've used some tricks to temporarily get ahead, don't you think about it? Even if love at the elementary level is pure and cute, first love that begins with wanting to be together and curiosity towards the opposite sex will become a failed memory for most people. From a certain standpoint, Amelia had completed her long evolution. Her ability to read souls had been strengthened to the extreme. Her mature rationality also made her seem even more mature in dealing with people. The revived Roland now had a complete soul, and he now had the possibility of living in love. From the perspective of a revived soul, the current Roland was just like a young man who had just entered puberty. He was unable to control his emotions that would easily go berserk, and he was unable to rationally analyze his increasingly complex emotions. For a young man who had just learned how to fall in love, it was naturally the easiest for him to fall in love with the beautiful women around him. Convincing Roland to leave at such a time and monopolize the position by his side, even allowing his best friend's feelings to mix with his feelings for Roland in order to obtain a favorable impression of him, was indeed quite a despicable method in the eyes of Amelia and Eliza, who had been bitterly waiting for Roland. "Ha, are you talking about yourself? If I recall correctly, Roland was your first love as well. Could it be that you truly desire the bitter and memorable failure of your first love?" Perhaps it was because her face was far too red that she was unable to calm down for a long time. She returned to her cat form, and I discovered that even the tips of her cat ears were completely red. Right now, Harloise was completely different from her usual attitude of watching from the sidelines and fanning the flames. She was now quite aggressive. Only a girl who has never been in love before would be so foolish as to deal with her own feelings. Do you think that you'll be able to obtain this man by constantly forcing him? You're wrong. That will only make him feel like he owes you, fear you, and stay away from you. Even if you've been together with him for the past 2 years, he'll still choose me in the end. This isn't a coincidence. This is inevitable. Ever since she started in the Northlands, Harloise had already noticed the difference. Even without her, Amelia and Eliza would never have been able to obtain Roland's true heart. That's right, Harloise used the word you instead of you, which meant that the word you didn't only include Amelia, but also Eliza. In Roland's eyes, Eliza was his precious daughter. Now that this position was firmly locked onto him, no matter how hard Eliza worked as his lover and how much she sacrificed, it would only make Roland feel like he owed her far too much. He wanted to treat her well, but in the end, he neglected the very foundation. He didn't see her as a woman that he could love or hope to possess. Roland's feelings for Eliza are pure familial love. He can unhesitatingly risk his life for Eliza, but that's only because he views Eliza as his own daughter. Don't look at how crazy Roland is in other areas. When it comes to family and love, he's an incredibly conservative fellow. This is the same for Renée as well. As juniors, they've always been outside of Roland's field of vision. Harloise's light words contained a hint of regret. In her eyes, Eliza was quite pitiful. She did everything she could to help Roland, and after continuously obtaining Roland's gratitude and guilt, the heavy shackles of gratitude and familial love completely cut off any possibility of developing a relationship with Roland. And Eliza's unrepentant sacrifice of her life before stepping into the abyss was quite moving, but it was also a heavy burden that couldn't be returned. When all these complicated emotions were in a mess, it was impossible for love to sprout. Unless she's both strong and powerful, there's no chance at all. Harloise came to such a conclusion. From this, it could be seen that the Banshee Queen in everyone's hearts was indeed quite sly. Perhaps she had seen through everything from the very start, yet she pretended to be an uninterested bystander and slowly got closer to her goal. In terms of love experience, Harloise indeed had the ability to look down on her two competitors. Fine then, if lesbian experience counted as love experience, Harloise was indeed quite an amazing person. Meanwhile, her two competitors obviously had zero experience. While Eliza and Amelia kept making mistakes, Harloise knew what Roland desired and hoped for. That was why she only stayed by his side, but was confident that she would be able to obtain his heart in the end. Could it be that this was the main reason why long-distance romantic vows of undying love sounded so nice, but would always lose to time, as well as the main reason why those who insisted on wasting time by trying to steal from him? Perhaps you're stronger than Eliza, but isn't it a bit too late for you to understand your own thoughts? Amelia Milan, will never give up. No matter how wonderful first love is, the final victor will always be the person who's more suitable for him. Once his feelings become more mature, he'll choose the most suitable woman for him. Do you still not understand? Roland made it quite clear that he doesn't lack assistants or fighters. He's never cared about utilitarianism or suitability at all. What he wants is a safe harbor, a confidant. Forget it, I think I should say less. Relationships were always emotional. Reasoning and calculating didn't seem right from the very start. In Harloise's eyes, no matter if it was Amelia or Eliza, they were both far too rational. Sometimes, sincere feelings would be far more moving than considerations of personal benefit. Even the faraway sacrifices wouldn't be able to compare to a sincere greeting every day. Eliza had always been giving and sacrificing. She originally believed that this would make Roland fall in love with her, but she didn't consider whether or not Roland would be willing to see such sacrifices. Not to mention the guilt and pain he felt when he learned of her sacrifices. In Harloise's eyes, this was another type of self-satisfaction and selfishness. This was just like two men fighting to the death over a woman, but neither of them asked whether or not the woman liked one of them, or whether or not she was willing to see others bleed for her. And even if Harlois forced Roland to promise that Eliza was his girlfriend, so what? Harlois had used a dangerous situation and debt to exchange for a lover's relationship. This caused the two of them to become estranged from each other. If Eliza was still Roland's sharp-tongued maid, Harlois probably wouldn't even have had a place to get involved. Eliza voluntarily moved away from Roland's position. The sly Harlois took this opportunity to stay by Roland's side and accompany him, sharing his pain and happiness. She patiently waited for her sluggish emotional intelligence to mature and become the only one by his side. Perhaps it would take a long time for Blockhead to finally come to his senses. Perhaps the current favorable impression he had of Roland wasn't enough for his memories to solidify into love. However, Harlois was confident that she could endure until the very end and become the only winner. Of course, for the sly Harlois, she had already said what she needed to say. Since she had already declared war and suddenly joined the battle, she wouldn't remind her competitor of her mistake. The current Amelia had already seen her past mistake. That was why she didn't use any extreme methods after confirming her own intentions. Instead, she became gentler towards Roland. Perhaps in the following days, as long as Roland didn't go too far in seeking death, his days would become much more comfortable. And if Roland knew that while he was still celebrating his freedom, the two witches had already sent him a challenge with him as the wager, he would probably be hiding in a corner and shivering. He would probably be shivering in a corner and shouting that women were scary. Right now, the sun was shining brilliantly, and the sinister atmosphere had dissipated. The highest-ranking officer of this town finally dared to come over and discuss proper business with the infighting. Chapter 541. While Roland was still worrying about all sorts of things, the adventuring team in the ruins met with a major crisis. They were almost at their destination, and victory was in sight. However, a tremendous number of demons suddenly swarmed up from the lower levels, ranging from weak inferior demons to berserker demons. At first, the adventuring team thought that they had only summoned one wave of reinforcement. However, as they fought, more and more demons appeared, and the demons became stronger and stronger. However, when they heard the roars of inferno demons from the lower levels, even an idiot would realize that something was wrong. The sly and vicious assassin demons were the weakest of high-level demons. However, they were still at the mid-level gold level. Ordinary mercenaries wouldn't be able to deal with them. The assassin demons walked out from the shadows, and their first wave of attacks brought casualties. Tim Ladd sensed that the ground was constantly shaking as if some gigantic creature was slowly approaching. He already guessed what was going on, so he decided to retreat and ask for reinforcements from Roland. Tim Ladd went against everyone's wishes and unhesitatingly destroyed the stairs leading to the lower levels in order to stop the demons from chasing him. Of course, Tim Ladd made such a decision because he already learned that the wood spirits had arrived. With the powerful wood spirits' assistance, Tim Ladd rejected Barton's decision to attack with his life on the line. Our reinforcements have already arrived. Trust me, they're strong enough. At the very least, it'll be more meaningful than us going down to die. Not only that, Tim Ladd felt magical waves from Sophocles the Deceiver. Not only did he rejoice at his lucky escape, he also confirmed that his decision to wait for reinforcements had been correct. Now they had retreated to the training field that they had just left. Here, the spiritual creatures that were unable to leave the training field were now able to assist them since they had already reached an agreement. Soon, the sword saints and martial artists indeed acted when the sword saints and martial artists reappeared. They had already offended the sword saints and martial artists, so these outsiders were their only hope. The mechanical guards on the upper levels also began to invade the lower levels. Now that the adventuring team was surrounded by enemies from all sides, the training field became Tim Ladd and the others' only shelter. It was precisely because the training field had become a new battlefield that Roland was able to hear the constant sounds of sword energy when Tim Ladd asked for reinforcements. The reason why Timlad was able to make such an accurate judgment was because he received information that the wood spirits would send out their strongest elite fleet in order to hunt down their escaped father. This was a fleet of battleships that would be powerful enough to start a war against any country. The Mother Arkansas. Without even mentioning the war machines on board, the over 1,000 wood spirits on board were already a frightening combat force. That was over 1,000 royal guards, existences of the weakest gold rank. Due to certain reasons, many Valkyrie had chosen to join the wood spirits. Now, the wood spirits were no longer limited to just the wood spirits alone. Many powerful vassals had joined the wood spirits, and the wood spirits' special products and technology, as well as the frightening potential of a silver species. The wood spirits had now become a powerful new faction in the mortal plane, a new faction on the level of a mega-empire. And now, this mega-faction's creator goddess and the first empress had led an entire fleet of top-tier royal guards and battleships, all for the sake of hunting down a man who had escaped from a marriage. The fairies' newspapers would probably be filled with gossip for the next month. But for a certain traitor, at least judging from the results, his choice had been correct. I actually came here in an ark in order to hurry over here. If I had been foolish enough to hide the truth. Timlad sighed and felt rather proud of himself. All right then, some truths had already been laid out on the table. Timlad was the one who had betrayed Roland's whereabouts to Amelia and the others. Actually, not long after Roland had disappeared, Timlad and the others had received a joint notice from Amelia, Renée, and the others. Anyone who dared to receive a call from Roland and not immediately notify the Roland search and capture team would be punished afterwards. When Timlad received the letter, he had hesitated for several seconds between offending Roland or offending Amelia and the others. In the end, he unhesitatingly chose Amelia. If I offend Big Brother Roland because of personal matters, at most he'll complain a little or something, or he'll play some hilarious pranks. But if I offend those women, perhaps it was only some people's excuse that women had the right to be unreasonable. But those women truly weren't reasonable at all. Offending both the Mist Kingdom's Empress and the Wood Spirit Empress would be the equivalent of simultaneously offending two mega-factions, not to mention that Timlad's former backer. Just thinking about it caused Timlad's scalp to go numb. If they make things difficult for you, you'll really die. They won't kill you, Roland, but they'll definitely kill any accomplices who dare to help you hide. So, I apologize, Big Brother Roland. It's better for you to suffer a little than for all of us to die. Timlad received a large amount of promises of rewards after informing Roland. Not only had Timlad personally come here to support Roland, but he had also been sent by those women to act as a spy for Roland. Right now, Roland still hadn't realized that the person he was preparing to rescue was actually a traitor. But he would definitely understand once this matter was resolved. And now, Timlad wasn't worried at all despite facing a pincer attack from both the front and the back. Actually, he still had a trump card up his sleeve. This was a reward given to him by a certain someone. And now, all the conditions had been met. It was time to use this trump card. The ground was now covered in runes formed from blood. The mercenaries were comparing the runes to the rune's structure. But some people found Timlad's actions rather incomprehensible. These are corrupted runes from the lower planes. Such evil runes and such large amounts of sulfur. Could it be that he intends to summon demons? Or is he a demon as well? Perhaps it wasn't a good thing to suspect one's teammates right now, but since the enemy was a demon, Timlad's actions would naturally be quite conspicuous. Barton secretly tightened his grip on his spear and war hammer. He had already prepared himself for the worst-case scenario that all of this was a demon's scheme. The magical swordsman Mary, who also came from the Northlands, was confused at first. But then, she had an expression of realization as she directly spoke up. "You intend to summon that person?" The strange thing was that Mary was pointing at the Valkyrie Roland. "Yep, she gave me a summoning blueprint. Judging from the time, she's not far from here." We can afford to pay her tribute. If Her Majesty comes out and doesn't see her target, she'll probably go berserk. From a certain standpoint, ever since Roland was listed on the most wanted list, the fairies had already dug up every last bit of information about him. His subordinates would forever gossip about him in private. Mary naturally knew about Roland's troubles. Of course, Timlad knew that something was wrong with this situation. Mary had originally given him this magical blueprint as a precautionary measure. If Roland really intended to escape, then he was supposed to summon her at all costs to teleport and capture him. Using it here would definitely go against her principles, and right now she was probably quite close to Starwood City. If he summoned her but didn't see Roland, or if Roland had already escaped, Timlad could already see a year's worth of small shoes right in front of him. There's no helping it. It's still better than dying like this. Look, those Valkyrie demons are starting to slack off as well. If they use too much energy, they'll vanish. We can't rely on them for everything. Soon, the sacrificial runes were finished. Timlad had the mercenaries toss a large pile of demon corpses into the magical formation. Then, a red light began to boil within the magical formation as a powerful will faintly descended upon this place. Your Majesty, you should be able to sense Roland's soul waves. He's about to escape. Please come and capture him. Roland! Red mana howled angrily as an even larger amount of mana materialized. The demon corpses were visibly disintegrating into dust as a pitch-black spatial crack opened up. A powerful existence was currently traversing the boundaries of space itself. No matter how one looked at it, this scene seemed like a malicious betrayal. Catalina, Barton, and the others all gaped at this scene, only to discover that the powerful existence that came out of the spatial crack looked so similar to Roland's. Chapter 542. While Timlad was forced to use a summoning spell to summon the furious reinforcements, Starwood City became busy. Everyone knew that the undead calamity would never tire and would only grow in numbers. The standard strategy to deal with the undead calamity was to kill the leader of the undead army. Only by concentrating our elite forces to kill the leader of the undead army would we be able to end the battle before the undead calamity became unstoppable. Although it seemed that I had used all sorts of underhanded methods to successfully kill the leader of the undead army, that didn't mean that I had won. Legendary stories always ended with a certain hero slaying a certain monster or a certain giant dragon. However, there was no record of when the war came to an end, when the Demon King's subordinates began to flee, and when the giant dragon's subordinates lost control of the monsters. That was the beginning of the most dangerous phase. As expected, the undead army is beginning to collapse. This is the worst development of all. The scattered undead army was not easy to deal with. Perhaps a mid-level vampire was just cannon fodder that could survive a little longer on the battlefield, but if it was hidden in a city with towering city walls, it would be a dangerous serial killer. If it was in a small village with only militia, it would be a disaster. In most areas of Ike, a single mid-level undead would be difficult enough to deal with. High-level undead with intelligence could even create death cities, death towns, and other types of forbidden zones for all life. There were now countless mid-level undead scattered on the battlefield. The undead that were being chased by the wood spirits' aerial knights were mostly liches and death knights. Even the undead lords and undead lords didn't care about their image at all as they ran for their lives like drowning dogs. These high-level, legend-level, and top-level undead had all come through teleportation portals. High-level undead had far more intelligence than ordinary people, so they wouldn't voluntarily go through a one-way teleportation portal. They were running away to the side of Starwood City, where the vast plains were. As for me, even if I wanted to surround and kill them, it would be impossible. Although we had the advantage of the sky and the advantage of victory, a battle of annihilation would still be fought on the ground. The Sky Knight could fight for the advantage and control the sky, but the defeated army would still have to be killed one by one, and we didn't have enough troops on the ground. Have the wood spirits descend to the ground and engage in a cruel battle? The more desperate the situation, the more vicious a mad dog would be. It would be far too cruel for the wood spirits, who already had weak physical bodies, to engage in a large-scale battle without any time to set up defenses. Even if we win, we'll have to make a huge sacrifice. Amelia shook her head. I can do my best in the pursuit. Hunting them down was fine, but attacking them head-on was out of the question. The wood spirit's mother empress refused to allow her own species to make too many sacrifices for another country. I knew Amelia's personality. Since she had already made a concession, there was no need to mention anything else. Right in front of us, the undead lords voluntarily dispelled their control over the low-level undead. They simply gave the order to flee. The undead that didn't know fatigue scattered further and further as they ran, as if they had split into countless lines. These undead lords under the direct command of the undead emperors were all elite troop. If they were allowed to become bandits or take over the mountains, this country would be completely doomed. And the only solution, yes, I've thought of a solution, but it's a little dangerous. Looks like I'll have to negotiate with conservation. The undead emperors controlled the undead lords controlled the high-level undead, the high-level undead controlled the mid-level and low-level undead, and the mid-level undead controlled the cannon fodder. This made the undead emperors the greatest weakness of the undead army. And if I wanted to stop the defeated undead army from fleeing, negotiating with the undead emperors was perhaps the only option. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, causing the entire world to transform into pitch-black Hades. And then, not far away from me, an ice lily blotted out the sky. Numerous ice petals floated in the air, but then shattered. The countless flower petals transformed into countless meteors, and before I could even react, everything before me turned white. Come out. I regained my senses and returned to that clear sky with white clouds. Meanwhile, the golden-haired elf was holding my hand with a worried expression. Why did I feel so awkward seeing Harloise like this? As expected, I should find an excuse to have her act like a cat. What was that just now? I let go of my hand while lightly coughing. You don't recognize it? Wasn't that one of the foundational theories for your Ice Aeon spell? Harloi's question was indeed quite reasonable. As an ice archmage, I naturally recognized the spell I just used. In fact, I had even spent a great deal of effort in researching it. However, it was precisely because I recognized this forbidden spell that I had such doubts. If we're not mistaken, that really was Celsna's Flower of Blessing? Yes, it's the super forbidden spell that theoretically requires 10 semi-god mages to simultaneously supply mana to it. The 3 mages present all fell silent. The spell formula for this forbidden spell was no secret. However, nobody in history had ever been able to use it. That was because it required far too much mana, to the point where even the entire Truth Symposium wouldn't be able to supply such a large amount of mana. Yet, a forbidden spell that was viewed as purely theoretical was right in front of us. It could only be said that conservation was indeed quite amazing. Also, she had noticed that something was wrong with the situation. There are only 2 possibilities for me to run into a forbidden spell the moment I entered. Either I was unlucky enough to run into a forbidden spell, or she's constantly tossing out forbidden spells in an attempt to smash a hole in that world. Will she be able to come out? I don't know. But theoretically speaking, she's already become a part of that world. Say, what do you think will happen to a goldfish that destroys her own fish tank? Is the best-case scenario that she dies together with conservation? Do you think she knows? Of course. Don't underestimate any undead emperor. High-level mages at least have some understanding of space. At the undead emperor's level, falling into a trap might be a temporary mistake, but if she's still confused after falling into a trap, that's a natural idiot. She'd rather die together with conservation than become a prisoner. What a fierce personality. While I was exclaiming at conservation's fierce personality, it was obviously impossible to ask her to help me suppress the undead. She had already declared that she would rather die than be free. What else could I possibly use to threaten her? Since conservation had already decided to sacrifice her own life, it would be difficult to discuss anything else with her. The only bargaining chip that conservation would take a liking to was her freedom. But, even if I wanted to release her, I wouldn't be able to do so. Not only that, there's no room for discussion. No matter if it's because of her grudge against you or the possibility of breaking out of her prison, she'll definitely attack you the moment she sees you. Are you confident that you'll be able to survive that forbidden spell? I'm confident that I'll be instantly killed. I recalled the general principles behind that forbidden spell. One of them was to lower the surrounding temperature and create a zone of extreme cold, using the constant low temperature to kill. Although my ice aeon was also capable of creating a similar effect, I doubted that the extremely low temperature would be able to save me. If I still had my frigid winter earth, I could create the coldest ice to try and resist the extreme cold. But right now, the difference in power level was far too great. It would be impossible for me to survive the forbidden spell. Harloise and I stared at each other, but neither of us could come up with a solution. I watched as the undead scattered more and more, yet there was nothing I could do. At this moment, I felt more and more powerless than ever. If only I could use Ice Aeon like conservation, however, there were no ifs in this world. Perhaps a certain evil goddess had once tried to sell regret pills to me. But, apart from the fact that it tasted incredibly bitter, it didn't change anything. Suddenly, someone blocked the path of the fleeing undead. This person even used his own physical body to form a defensive line. That's the god of discipline and justice's Holy Church Knight Squadron? Are they intending to die? No, that bishop is intending to perform a god's descent. Chapter 543. The god of justice and discipline, Napus, was a weak god, a third-rate order god. However, he was also the main religion of the Solidukedom. Belief was the food for the order gods. It was an unspoken rule of this world that a small country would have a small god. The rise of a mega-empire or a new species would also mean that a powerful god had risen to power. For example, Womians from back in the day was now the guardian god of the Mist Alliance. He had successfully risen to power. Of course, there were those who succeeded, but there were also those who went too far. For example, Rose and Lady Storm had already completely fallen. According to the traditions of the Holy War, since this was Napuz's territory, he was the protector of this country. When the forces of chaos challenged the Order faction, he should be the one to lead the mortals and churches under his command to meet them head-on. However, it was obvious that by the time he reacted, the undead would have already spread into a calamity. His population would be greatly reduced, and he wouldn't be able to gather enough power to stop the calamity. It was likely that the god himself would fall into eternal slumber. This was also the foundational reason why it was so difficult for weak gods who relied on belief to survive the holy war. Although weak gods were above mortals, they greatly relied on mortals, and it was quite easy for weak gods to leave the stage early in battle. From this standpoint, Roland and the others had helped Napus greatly. A weak god fighting against an undead emperor who had the power of a main god in his own country? It was obvious what the outcome would be like. But right now, Napus was probably more anxious than anyone else as he watched the undead begin to scatter. As far as I could see, the Holy Church Knights had formed a defensive formation. On a simple temporary altar, the formerly arrogant bishop knelt down, clenched his fists, and prayed in a low voice. It was as if the gods in the sky had heard his prayer. The clouds parted, and a pillar of light descended, lighting him up. Sacrifice. It was obvious that it would be difficult to choose a vessel for a god's power. I didn't believe that any random high-level priest would be a suitable vessel for a god's descent. In that case, sacrificing one's own physical body and soul as the price for a god's descent would be the prerequisite. And if one's physical body wasn't strong enough and didn't have a high degree of compatibility, how many true gods' power could one descend, and how many seconds would be a problem? If I can complete a divine art, perhaps it'll be of help. But soon, I wouldn't have to guess anymore. Under the pillar of light, a 3-meter-tall knight of light riding a white horse stood up. It was the human form of the legendary god of commandment. He fiercely waved his snow-white spear, as if he was roaring something, boom! All right, he had indeed self-destructed. With him as the core, the entire horizon was ignited by a white brilliance. The power brought about by the explosion of a true god's incarnation was at the peak of the mortal world. To forcefully perform a god's descent on someone who was not a god's descender and then self-destruct the incarnation, for a low god, perhaps 100 years of accumulation would be considered a waste. However, the power of a god's incarnation's self-destruction was real. Intense white light illuminated everything in front of them, and the horizon was cleansed by the positive energy mixed with the power of faith and divine power. The undead that were the first to be hit were ignited, and they howled in pain as they were reduced to ashes. Perhaps Napus wasn't very powerful as a low god, but his divine concept was commandment, and he was a pure order god. As a holy light god, his self-destruction would definitely be the natural enemy of all creatures of chaos. The unluckiest of all was probably the Lich Lord, who was relying on magic to fly. Originally, he should have been the most likely to escape the battlefield due to his high-speed flight. However, he was directly hit by a shockwave of positive energy. He had no chance of dodging at all, not to mention that his entire body was filled with powerful negative energy. His crown and staff, which were both magical artifacts, were instantly destroyed. Pitch-black magic enveloped his skeleton, which was lit up by a white light. Overflowing positive energy directly shot out from his eye sockets and mouth, transforming the terrifying Lich into a candle of light that spat out holy light from all his pores. His laughable appearance instantly froze, and then instantly exploded into thousands of pieces. Large numbers of undead collapsed just like that. Surviving a large-scale forbidden spell required not only luck, but also power level. The weaker the undead, the less likely it was that they would be able to survive in such a situation. Wherever the shockwave passed, zombies became cooked meat, skeletons became spare parts, ghouls became skewers, bone dragons became lanterns, and banshees enjoyed the destruction of mermaids. How many forbidden spells have been destroyed already? From a certain standpoint, I felt rather helpless as well. Whenever a mega combat strength appeared on a regular battlefield, it would be either you throwing a forbidden spell or I self-destructing. It would be quite pitiful to be a regular melee combatant. Even a myth-ranked individual wouldn't know if they would be sent to the heavens by some mage or priest in the next instant. Not only was God's destruction affected by the shockwave, the wood spirit knight who was chasing after the undead weren't too far away from them. They were also affected by the shockwave. No matter what kind of magical plant equipment they were using to fly, they could only freely fall to the ground after being attacked by such a powerful divine power. Fortunately, the wood spirit knight herself was also a physical creature with powerful positive energy. After the magical plants and magical machines received the first wave of positive energy, their physical bodies weren't damaged much. Their minds also recovered after a short period of dizziness. Dwarven parachutes were standard equipment for wood spirit knight. Tiny white flowers appeared in the sky. However, judging from how the wood spirit knights kept waving their tiny fists at the sky, they didn't seem to feel any gratitude towards this god at all. The wood spirit knights were only barely affected by the shockwave, but the wood spirit temple knight who were protecting them were right next to the shockwave. Even though the wood spirit knight managed to complete his god's descent, not a single one of the wood spirit temple knight retreated. They were then swallowed up by the fatal white light behind them. The self-destruction of a god's incarnation would be incredibly powerful. There would be no survivors, and it would be impossible for there to be survivors. However, judging from how the Wood Spirit Temple Knight appeared in such a dangerous location and fearlessly fought until the very last moment, it was likely that they had long since been mentally prepared to sacrifice themselves. This is their home. Behind them are their families and species. Compared to long-lived species, humans had short lifespans and low talent. They had many things to worry about and have many desires. Humans appeared to be short-sighted and a waste of their lives, but in times of danger, heroes would always appear. Perhaps it was precisely because humans had so many things to worry about and so many responsibilities that they knew how precious life was. That was why they knew that it was necessary to sacrifice themselves at critical moments. I had seen far too many such brave warriors and Wood Spirit Temple protectors. The Wood Spirit Temple protectors sacrificed themselves in exchange for divine power's self-destruction. This indeed achieved tremendous result. At least 80% of the fleeing undead had fallen into eternal sleep due to the explosion. The remaining undead were all injured. Once the Wood Spirit Temple's second wave of Wood Spirit Temple Knight arrived, killing the undead would be much easier than before. Perhaps some undead would be able to escape, but it would be incomparable to the destructive undead calamity from before. The pitiful state the undead were in helped me relax. I could now focus on the ruins. Timlad hadn't contacted me of his own volition ever since I sent him a request for help. Don't tell me he's really dead. How about I go take a look? Chapter 544. I left the battle on the ground to Starwood City. If I didn't send reinforcements soon, Timlad would probably blame me for going to the Hades. The ominous black cat was still napping on my shoulder. The green-haired ominous which was walking in front of me. With such a lineup, it was likely that anyone could go to the Chaos Abyss. Fine, I admit that I was just making things up. Even though it was still the same people, I felt suffocated when they walked together. My logic told me that they could be trusted, but my instincts told me that they would likely kill me first rather than kill their opponent. On the surface, everything seemed to have returned to normal. However, since some words were said, it would be impossible to take them back. Many things didn't seem to change on the surface, but they had indeed changed. Silly cat, I'll change what you like about me, all right? I was no idiot. I had paused in surprise just now, but now that everything was over and I had calmed down, I noticed many things that I hadn't noticed before. Could it be that the silly cat really liked me? I wasn't Beifong, who didn't like cats. Yep, that was only natural. At most, I would treat her like a brother. Did she really want to sleep with me? But I truly didn't know what part of me would attract the silly cat's attention. I usually treated her like cat balls, cat frisbees, cat scarves, cat carpets, cat postal service, cat scouts. I used all sorts of excessive methods to treat my pet. I was already lucky that Drool's Animal Protection Organization hadn't found out about it. Could it be that the silly cat actually had some special hobbies? Alright then, if I couldn't figure it out, I could just ask. She's beautiful. Princess Peach is really cute. Hugging her should be really comfortable. I felt rather helpless. Her answer was so honest that it was impossible to argue against it. Actually, many couples started chasing after each other for the most basic reason of all. Why do you like her? She has such a bad personality. She's so arrogant and unreasonable. I like her because I like her. There's no reason. If she had a birthmark and pockmarks on her face, would you still like her? A smart person would probably answer, of course, because this comment would likely be heard by the person in question. An honest person would probably remain silent and not tell the truth, since they didn't want to be labeled as someone who judged others by their appearance. The world had always been like this. They would always use ambiguous words like pleasing to the eye or getting along well with someone to describe the beginning of a favorable impression. However, no one dared to say that they had never judged a person by their appearance. After all, everyone would look at a person's face first. With the same personality, a good-looking violent woman would be a tsundere, an average-looking woman would be a tomboy, and a low-looking woman would be ugly and mischievous. Of course, it was the same for women when they looked at men. Handsome men would always receive preferential treatment and patience. Of course, looks weren't everything. Whether they could get together still depended on their feelings. But for an unlucky guy who didn't have good looks, he probably wouldn't even have the chance to build a relationship. But personally speaking, I felt that it would be better for me to be slightly more muscular, at least based on my experience of being targeted by those scary dark elf antis. Although my face had caused me so much trouble in the past, I was still rather happy to be praised as handsome by a gold elf who had astonishingly high standards of beauty. That, no matter what, you should say he's handsome. Have you forgotten my hobbies? I wouldn't be able to stand it if you really grew up to be a handsome or muscular man. I'm already sick of seeing such elven men. Ah, a Shota that's suitable for women's clothing is so cute. Let me kiss him. Goddess of wind, you've truly done a good deed. What did it feel like to be teased by a cat and have a barbed tongue lick my ear? At that moment I felt a cold, wet, and painful sensation at the tip of my ear. My most sensitive spot had been licked, followed by a chill down my spine as goosebumps appeared all over my body. I tried to grab it, but it was empty air, and the black cat in front of me jumped in front of me. The silly cat proudly shook her cat ears and wagged her tail in front of me. Then, she unhesitatingly revealed her bad hobbies. So she was actually a strange auntie just like Momo. She had always been peeking at my body. One day, I'll grow a real beard. At that time, I'll stab you to death with it. Ha, I'm quite curious as to when you'll grow an X down there. Harlois directly said sexually harassing words. When the Gold Elf Princess transformed into the Gold Elf Queen due to the passage of time, 10,000 years of loneliness finally accumulated. I didn't even dare to think too deeply about what kind of existence was underneath the lowly's body. I regretted it, I truly regretted it. Back when I was still an undead, I naturally suppressed my desires, which resulted in many scandals. Now that I had helped her recover her physical body, it was likely that she had given me quite a bit of trouble. I was sweating profusely as I stared at her, wondering if I should use a goblin rocket or a gnome flying chair to send her to the moon and completely eliminate all future troubles. At this moment, the silly cat suddenly started laughing to the point where she started rolling around on the ground. Haha, I was just teasing you. You actually took it seriously. The black cat suddenly jumped up onto my left shoulder. This time, she licked my finger and meowed as she licked it, just like any other ordinary pet cat. However, the words that were being transmitted through our soul connection were becoming worse and worse. No matter what, I'm still the Gold Elf Princess. Even if I need a ******, Renee would be more suitable than you. She has the same face, and her figure is much better. Besides, I've only been alive for a few years now, so I don't have that many desires. I was just joking and you actually took it so seriously? You're so narcissistic. Although there were still quite a few inconsistencies in her words, our soul connection told me that she was telling the truth, especially when she said that Renee would be more suitable than me. This silly cat actually took a liking to my granddaughter. I think I shouldn't tell Renee to be careful. After all, she's already the famous Yuri princess. I felt slightly more reassured now. Even if the silly cat really did intend to commit a crime, it would still be better for her to die than for me to die. Renee, since your reputation has already been tarnished, why don't you block another calamity for me? Since Harlois had made such a ruckus, I no longer had the mood to ask her about her personal feelings. What if I found out something even scarier? Let's go. I hope that Tim lad hasn't died yet. It's so difficult to find talented people in this day and age. The Wood Spirit's assault airships were already parked at the edge of the city walls. With their assistance, it wouldn't take long for us to reach the ruins. Roland shook his head as he walked towards the wood spirit's assault airship. However, he didn't notice the abnormal smile on the cat's face as she sat on his shoulder. She had already achieved her goal, so Roland stopped asking questions. As if sensing some danger, Roland suddenly turned around to see Amelia, who had been silently watching the entire time. Amelia's bright smile gave off an increasingly dangerous feeling. Roland immediately sweated profusely as he turned around and sped up as if he was escaping from some disaster. Some words had already been said, and some words had been heard. Some idiots finally understood their own thoughts. Some feelings had been expressed in sincere words, and some feelings were still hidden. But as time went on, everyone's personal feelings had already changed. It was likely that it would be difficult for them to return to how they used to be. Besides, the 7 original sins were all in place now. As Roland's soul became complete, his feelings would naturally recover. Perhaps they were simply waiting patiently. Perhaps Roland would still be able to hide from the sly hunters, but it seemed that he wouldn't be able to hide for long. The Wood Spirit's assault airship fleet was a classic example of nature's style. Back in the Forest of Dreams, the Wood Spirits had used giant logs to create their airship. Perhaps this was the origin of the Wood Spirits' assault airship fleet. Now, the Wood Spirits' air force and airship fleet were all constructed from plants. Flowers, vines, and logs were the most basic design. Every single material was carved with intricate patterns. But if one took a closer look, they would discover that the entire plant airship was just like an exquisite wooden sculpture. The core of the airship was made up of wooden dragon bones and a sturdy body. The wings and jets were made up of transparent flower-like feathers. The vines were both decorations, as well as a melee defense system. We were riding on a special assault airship. It looked just like a flower made up of 5 petals. 3 petals were the wings, and 2 intersecting petals were the airship's body. Walking on this airship made me feel as if I had entered a fairy tale world. Although I could also hear the mechanical sounds of magical engines, I could sense that most of the airship's power source was still natural magic. Back when I left, we were still using wooden boats. It would seem that the Wood Spirit's magical engineering technology had improved greatly in the past few years. They had even created their own path with the help of their creator goddess. Is this a new technology? It feels like there's no wood here at all. The strange thing was that I didn't receive an answer to my question. In the past, I was treated like a VIP in the Forest of Dreams, so the Wood Spirits would probably fight to answer my question. But when I turned around, I understood why. A small unfamiliar Wood Spirit actually shrieked when she saw me approaching. She then hurriedly ran away while shouting for me. I don't want to get pregnant. Save me. I was able to make a Wood Spirit pregnant just by chatting? Since when did I have such an ability? And even if I didn't ask, I knew exactly who did it. I turned around and glared viciously at Amelia, only to discover that she was still smiling subtly. Fine then, considering the difference in power levels between us, I strategically changed my gaze. Yep, it was only strategically changed. I definitely wasn't cowering. But, surprisingly, Amelia voluntarily explained what had happened. It's just a rumor. You released it? I'm not that childish. It's Renee. She has a deep grudge against me. You'd better think about how to explain things to her. You did so many things behind her back, and now you're back without giving her an explanation. TSK, a naughty child will still be a naughty child when she grows up. I'll teach her a good lesson later. Amelia smiled ambiguously as she shook her head. She didn't say anything else. She already knew that Renee had arrived. Since Roland said that he wasn't afraid, then she would just have to wait for a good show. Meanwhile, Harlois noticed another problem. What if Sophocles the Deceiver also arrives? What will you do? Even if they send a greater demon of the Earl rank or above, it won't be easy to deal with. Relax, I have an ace that's specifically meant to deal with main gods. It's best if he comes. He won't be going back. What? You have an ace that can deal with main gods? Then why didn't conservation use it just now? I smiled proudly but didn't answer. Actually, it was quite easy to think of an excuse for something like this. It wouldn't take long even if I wanted to. As I expected, Harlois had an expression of realization 3 or 4 seconds later. That ace is conservation, right? You really know how to squeeze out every last bit of value. I nodded. It might be a good thing that conservation was currently casting forbidden spells in Ike's world. Anyone who was cast into Ike's world would have to face an enraged undead emperor and her forbidden spells. Chapter 545. The gray buildings were covered in a thick layer of dust, and the moss-covered walls were filled with cracks and cracks. The floorboards beneath my feet made cracking noises, making me worry that I might miss my next step. But what was even more dangerous was the pitch-black behemoth before me. Red, green, and purple lights flashed in the darkness. These were all the warning lights on the mechanical guards that had been activated. Barton didn't even clean up after himself, of course. This was a surprise attack. If we cleaned them up one by one, they would have died of exhaustion long ago. The reinforcements that came to the ruins were 2 humans and 1 cat. Amelia tactfully refused the children's request to come along, and I, who had recovered my powers, was quite happy that I had a chance to try out my abilities. For the holy light! My ancient silver-gray battle hammer drew an arc in the air and viciously smashed into the diamond puppet's waist, causing its entire metal body to shatter. It didn't even have a chance to break through. No matter what material the puppet was made of, no matter if it was made of steel, metal, rock, or clay, it didn't seem like a large battle hammer. None of the puppets were able to dodge, nor were they able to move after being hit. Wherever I went, only piles and piles of raw materials were left behind. The mechanical guards weren't idiots either. When they discovered that they were unable to stop the enemies before them, most of the mechanical guards started using long-range attacks to counterattack. For a moment, I saw nothing but cannon fire. There seemed to be no space for me to dodge. For the Lich King. However, I laughed and ignored all the obstructions and attacks before me. I casually changed my battle cry and charged straight ahead. Just as the cannon fire was about to hit me, the phantom image of an angry red dragon flashed behind me, and then, clang clang clang. That was the sound of metal clashing against metal. The explosions were right in front of me, but they weren't able to stop my advance at all. I continued swinging my battle hammer at the puppets as if I was playing whack-a-mole. A crimson dragon-patterned heavy armor appeared on my body. In front of this semi-god equipment, these unenchanted gunpowder attacks wouldn't even be able to break through my defenses. Dragon-scale ice armor. The Guardian of Yongye. System evaluation. Semi-god equipment can grow. This armor is made from the eternal ice of the ancient dragon's blood in another world. There are special inscriptions on it, and the artifact Soul Irene Bela resides in it. The user is limited to Roland himself. Titan's Thunder Metal. This armor has legendary damage reduction, 50/divine equipment. Damage dealt by weapons below the divine equipment level will be reduced by 50 points. System notification. You actually embedded a Titan shield shard into it to increase its defense. Only you could think of something like that. Ein Mises protection. The dragon's bloodline flows within the armor. She is protecting the wearer of the armor. However, this isn't good news for the attacker. After all, this means that the wearer has to absorb at least 200 points of damage per day in order to be able to deal any damage to the wearer. This ability will automatically repair itself within 24 hours. Dragon Follower. I really can't believe this attribute would appear on an armor, but you've done it. The wearer can use various Dragon Follower abilities through this armor. Yongye's Authority. Due to the armor's special material, no ice damage will be able to lower its temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. This means that it's nearly immune to ice, and due to the ancient red dragon's bloodline, fire damage will be halved, and the lowest damage dealt will be reduced by 30 points. This armor with a soul was a trump card that I had sacrificed a lot of my power in exchange for. It was what I relied on to face any opponent. Compared to 7 years ago, my draconic bloodline had matured and my personal strength had increased, allowing this armor to go from legend-ranked to semi-god equipment. However, unlike other pieces of equipment that had undergone major changes after leveling up, this armor didn't gain any new abilities. It was just that its defensive stats had all doubled. Perhaps it was impossible to describe how powerful this armor was. However, an explosion that could kill any ordinary powerful individual exploded on my body, yet I felt nothing at all. That was enough to explain many things. Or, to put it more directly, after wearing this armor, I could completely ignore the attacks of a gold-ranked swordsman with myth-ranked equipment. That was because their instantaneous explosive damage wouldn't be able to break through the dragon-scale armor's natural defenses. And a sword saint who didn't need to worry about his own safety was wielding a god equipment level warhammer, the Light of Salvation, the Hope warhammer of the Envoy of Light, Wind. These mole rats were far too foolish. As a veteran sword saint, even if I only used a hammer, I could still use Blade Storm. As the most commonly used ultimate technique, Blade Storm was simple and direct to use. All you had to do was spin and use the spin to gather and release sword energy. Then, you would use centrifugal force to form a blade of sword energy and use the sharp blade of sword energy to attack your opponent. A red whirlwind rolled over like a road roller. The storm of death tore through everything in its path in this small space, turning all the puppets and machines it touched into spare parts and raw materials. It was impossible to stop its charge, so it directly broke through the walls. What's wrong with him? Amelia was rather curious. Roland wasn't a maniac on the battlefield. It was rare to see him fight unless it was absolutely necessary. Rather than sweating and bleeding on the battlefield, he was far more suited to scheming underhanded schemes in the council. He's probably been holding it in for too long. Harloise knew quite well that previously, Roland couldn't even pick up a steel sword, so how could he wear heavy armor on the battlefield? In the end, he had to teach swordsmanship with a wooden sword. He must have been quite depressed. Waha, I'm already undefeatable. Roland's battle roar could be heard in the distance, along with the sound of metal shattering and walls collapsing. The other 2 members of Roland's team shook their heads and hurriedly followed after him. While Roland's battle was going on in the building above his head, Tim Ladd, who had been beaten to a pulp by Roland's reinforcements, fell into a vexed state. And the reason for his vexed state was that Roland was angrily glaring at him. 4 long-lived species, 7 years was nothing more than 1 breath and 1 nap. But for an adult it was quite a long time. But for a 14-year-old girl who had only been sensible for 6 or 7 years, 7 years was more than half her life. Unlike her usual male short hair, Roland's blonde hair was braided into a ponytail that reached her waist. The childishness and gentleness on her face had completely vanished. This female knight with silver armor and a silver sword was fully armed. She carried a tower shield with the symbol of Galecastle on her back and a red spear. She also held an ancient battle flag in her hand. Just by standing there, she gave off the impression that she was an undying mountain range. She was as majestic as a goddess of war. The Night Princess, who was surrounded by pools of blood and corpses, continued to torture her demon opponent as she smiled in delight from the bottom of her heart. It was as if she was at the center of a celebratory banquet. "Kneel, you filthy lowly species!" Roland pressed the powerful Inferno demon lord onto the ground with a single arm. The muscular demon was still angrily roaring as Roland's combat goddess stepped on his chest. Roland's silver combat boots suddenly rose up, leaving a silver crescent in the air as she viciously stabbed into the Inferno demon's heart. Asterisk crack. Asterisk the sound of flesh tearing made everyone instinctively feel uncomfortable. However, this wasn't the end yet. Roland's combat boots fiercely twisted, directly shattering the Inferno demon lord's heart. Blood splattered everywhere. The Inferno Demon Lord would never be able to stand up again. The Inferno Demon Lord's expression changed from one of delight to one of displeasure when he saw the flesh on her combat boots. It seemed that the Inferno Demon Lord felt that such an opponent wasn't worthy of dirtying his boots. Blood covered the entire floor. Not far away from her was a mountain of demon corpses. When the Inferno Demon Lord's golden eyes focused on her next target, the Silver Knight Princess was still enjoying her slaughter feast. Judging from how the demons were furiously running away, this enjoyment wouldn't last for much longer. Renee Chin Mist, 21 years old. She was a direct descendant of a demon prince. She used to be the Night Princess, and was currently the Empress of the Mist Kingdom. She was a myth-ranked Chaos Abyss Knight, a descendant of the Mist, and the most dazzling star in this holy war. Her overflowing mana caused her blonde hair to flutter in the wind. She wore a silver combat skirt with white stockings and a pair of silver high-heeled boots. She had experienced hundreds of battles, which gave her an awe-inspiring aura of an Iron Princess. However, it was said that in formal and informal diplomatic situations, this Thorny Rose's long and slender legs had already kicked the vitals of many playboys who dared to try it. 7 years had allowed Renee to completely break free from Roland's shadow. Her past hesitation and inferiority complex had completely disappeared. Her naughty brat personality and soldier's aura had once again combined and evolved, forming her own powerful aura of a war goddess. Currently, she was silently raging and venting her anger on demons. However, this had already transformed into silent pressure on her companions. Everyone was so scared that they didn't dare to make a sound, including the pitiful demon captives hiding in a corner. That's right, even the violent and battle-hungry berserker demons were hugging each other and trembling in front of the furious demon queen. Even a high-level demon lord wouldn't have such an aura, causing them to feel fear as if their souls were about to be destroyed. Alright then, Catalina was also trembling. Her instincts were telling her that this woman, who greatly resembled Roland, had some sort of killing intent towards her from the very first time they met. Yesterday, she was still a lowly, but after a single night of carelessness, she became a mature woman. Not only that, she was the most violent type. She was the type that matured too early and was about to expire. Alright then, that was Roland's exact words. And because of this, he was being hunted down even more cruelly. And right now, she was angrily muttering that name. Damn it, Roland! She gritted her teeth tightly, but her long legs kept stomping down, as if stomping on the spiritual creatures lying on the ground would make her feel better. Wait, I'm not Roland. I'm just a copy of Roland's sword techniques. Shut up. Alright then, this copy of Roland that was moaning under the military boots rationally shut up. He discovered that the more he complained, the harder Roland stomped on him. He didn't want to disappear just like that. From a certain standpoint, he had helped his original body block a calamity. Perhaps the real Roland would even thank him. Even further down, the constantly worsening situation caused the current master of the Sky Tower to become more and more afraid. Finally, he made up his mind and paid even more soul coins to the demons. The opened Chaos Abyss Gate was finally enough for a demon lord to descend. Chapter 546. As I walked through the pitch-black tunnel, the shadows around me were unable to obstruct my senses. Perhaps I didn't have night vision like the long-lived species, but my sharp senses and tremendous combat experience allowed me to construct a 3D model of the environment in my mind even with my eyes closed, which allowed me to easily dodge these mechanical attacks. I swung my hammer, smashed them, and shattered them. Dozens of magical puppets were simply reduced to scrap metal. For experienced warriors, it would be more than enough to rely on their instincts against such an opponent. In fact, if it weren't for their combat instincts to dodge attacks, they would be too lazy to even bother dodging with their dragon armor. Our assault team had already wiped out these puppets once, and the remaining elite soldiers had probably joined in the assault team's encirclement as well. I didn't see any good puppets on my way here. This level isn't even enough to warm up, I contacted Timlad. Although it was so noisy that I couldn't hear what was going on, I could tell from Timlad's pitiful screams of "Boss Roland, hurry and save me. I can't hold on any longer," that they could probably hold on for a while longer. If they really can't hold on any longer, they won't be able to call for help. Yeah. I can tell that they still have some strength left, but I wonder what they're relying on. Everyone here was experienced. How could they not tell that Timlad's pleas for help lacked the nervousness and fear of a life-threatening situation? And even if we rushed over to help them, it wouldn't be something that could be done in a short period of time. The assault team's mechanical elevator had already been destroyed by someone. Even with Timlad's directions, the Sky Tower's defenses wouldn't be worth mentioning. It would still take some time for us to arrive. 369, 370. I had been counting before I collapsed, but now I could just casually count them. Looking at the large amount of mechanical wreckage behind me, I even suspected that this number would exceed 1,000 by the time we reached the lowest level. Most of the mechanical defense equipment wasn't even military grade. There were plenty of cleaning, repair, and nursing equipment. It would be so easy to clean up such a defensive system that I wanted to yawn. How could I tell that it wasn't military grade? The 6 armed robots that rushed over with strange buzzing sounds were holding brooms, dustpans, mops, and rags. A spray gun that suddenly popped out of the ground shot out thin jets of water. There was also strange music playing as it shot, just like a sprinkler telling newbies to take cover. Some of the strange-looking toys looked strange, but they made me want to laugh. Did the lullaby with the strange baby logo really come to the right place? The person who was spinning on the wheel was definitely not an acrobat. That flaming arm is indeed scary, but do you really think I'm a caveman who hasn't seen a welding torch before? I felt rather helpless against such an opponent. In fact, I even had the urge to shout, "Be more serious! This is a war." After using his battle hammer for a while, he put it away again. Now, he was using an ice sword that he had temporarily summoned. Although it couldn't compare to the calamity magic sword that Harlois had transformed into, it was enough to deal with these toys. Not only was it a waste to use the divine warhammer to deal with these things, but it was also a blasphemy against the divine warhammer. You still know how to cherish weapons? Do you think we've forgotten about the time you used the Roland sacred sword to crack walnuts? By the way, why did he waste his mana to freeze those furry bears and cleaning tools? I see that you changed your weapons in order to preserve the integrity of these puppets and mechanical creations. Let's see if we can commercialize it. Even if we can't sell it, we can give it as a gift. Who are you giving it to? Gift who? I paused in surprise at the simultaneous question from my companions. I didn't understand their covetous gazes, but I had a clear conscience, so there was nothing I couldn't say. Renee and Anne. Little girls like them probably really love stuffed animals. Back in the day, I gave Anne a skeleton doll, and she was so happy for so many days. You're asking for it. I give you 10 points for asking for it. I had already gotten used to ignoring the strange comments behind my back. I simply told them what I wanted to do. Actually, I feel rather guilty for leaving for so long without telling them, leaving them to deal with this mess. And since they're both juniors, Gleena should also have a gift. But she seems quite mature, so she might not like it. I think it's best to give her a proper mechanical puppet. The technology here is obviously far superior to the gnomes' and dwarves' trash toys. She's also an engineer, so she'll probably like it. I'm rather curious to see what expression Gleena will have when she receives a normal gift, while Renee receives a stuffed animal. Relax, you'll see it very soon. At the very least, it'll be sooner than expected. We chatted as we went downstairs. I was also gradually getting used to my current physical body through battle. After all, if I wanted to take the next step, it would be incredibly important to have the soul and physical body's compatibility. You're intending to break through to myth rank? Why don't you experience it more at saint rank? I didn't hide my desire for power and power. In fact, I was already preparing for it. Everyone here had once reached the peak of myth rank, so they could tell. Yep, I don't have much time. Not to mention, myth rank is quite special. Comprehending and experiencing it will be meaningless for me to break through to myth rank. Then, how many do you intend to get? Amelia's question came out of nowhere, but I instantly understood what she meant. Guess. I seemed to be speaking in riddles, but actually, even I didn't know how many myth items I would get this time. After all, I had learned far too many things and had far too many choices. The myth rank is an incredibly glorious and illusory realm for ordinary humans. However, our concept is that it's the transition before reaching semi-god. There was once a powerful individual who summed up the uniqueness of this rank in a single sentence. There's a path before reaching semi-god. The myth rank means that you've reached the end of your path. This stage is the conclusion of your and your entire species' path. Once you've reached semi-god, there will be no more paths. When mentioning the myth rank, the most common would probably be myth-ranked weapons. Indeed, the great majority of myth-ranked weapons had been left behind by myth-ranked individuals. The relationship between myth-ranked and myth-ranked was incredibly complex. Perhaps this would have to be explained from the extremely unique method of breaking through to the myth rank. The various ranks of humans were also the stages in which powerful individuals would discover their own potential. Those at the very front might not necessarily be strong, but they would definitely be the ones who had walked the furthest. An individual's pure energy level would be the limit at the peak of legend rank. Powerful mages being able to use forbidden spells at this rank was the best evidence. Meanwhile, the saint rank was more of an improvement in one's unique abilities. It was an improvement in power level similar to the concept of divine concepts. Since the saint rank was known as an existence that surpassed mortals, their physical body's potential would have been completely discovered. The pure energy and will in their physical body would be more than enough to interfere with the world. In fact, they would even have world privileges that ordinary people wouldn't be able to control. If they didn't choose to ascend to godhood, it would be impossible for them to improve any further. The myth rank was an inconceivable breakthrough to the perfect body. Since it's impossible to improve my physical body, I'll have to ask for external help. I didn't know who came up with such a path of advancement, nor did I know if this was the correct path. However, countless intelligent species had used their own experiences to prove that this path was feasible. Before reaching the myth rank, one would have to accumulate strength and slowly improve. As long as one was talented enough and had a long enough lifespan, they would one day reach the myth rank. But from the myth rank onward, one would have to fight against the heavens, against others, and against oneself. One would have to forcefully break through to the myth rank. The myth rank had 3 heavy doors. These were the 3 stages of breaking through to the myth rank, as well as the 3 steps to creating one's own myth-ranked weapon. The first step, which was the myth rank, was to continue improving one's concept, transforming it from an ethereal existence into a real existence. At this stage, one would still need to evolve one's physical body. For example, Adam himself was at this stage when he purified his phoenix flames into an undying concept. From then on, he was no different from the phoenix. As long as the flames didn't die, his physical body would be undying. The second step was to take this concept out of one's body and transform it into a real object. Creating something from nothing was incredibly difficult. In the process of creating a sword, one would often need to prepare raw materials and use these raw materials to create a finished product. The raw materials could be a certain weapon, a modified organ, or even the surrounding environment, a certain magic spell, or a certain soul world. The finished product would also be quite difficult to categorize. Let's use Adam as an example. At this stage, He completed the Phoenix's inheritance, obtained the Phoenix's blood and heart, and obtained the Phoenix's divine swords, Phoenix's favor, and Phoenix's heart. The third and final step would actually be the resonance between the physical body and the myth-ranked weapon. These weapons would be infused with your soul and concept to begin with. As long as these weapons became a part of your physical body, the expanded body would open up a stage for you to continue improving yourself. You would then completely break away from the mortal world and be able to see everything in front of you with no obstacles or boundaries. It didn't seem like you needed to do anything at all? Actually, this was the stage with the highest mortality rate. This seemingly easiest stage was actually the most difficult. It was also the most difficult stage, which was why there were so few semi-gods in the Ike plane. The physical body would be incomplete, and the soul would be incomplete. It would be impossible to resonate with your soul and be stuck. And the undead who didn't have a living physical body or a complete soul would be in so much pain at this stage that they would want to die. It was entirely possible to use their blood and tears to sue the creator goddesses for racism against the undead. If the concept was too weak and the materials weren't strong enough, the myth-ranked weapon created would either directly shatter or barely be usable. However, the myth-ranked weapon wouldn't be able to contain the undead's soul or future path and would be stuck. This was more than 70% of the reasons for failure. However, there was no need to be discouraged. It was still possible to start all over again. It was just that you would have to search for the concept from the very beginning. There was still a chance to make another breakthrough within 30 years. If the concept was too strong and the materials were too strong, the weapon created would be ridiculously powerful. It would be completely stuck, or even possible to directly die. Why? If the physical body couldn't handle the power of the weapon, the person would be controlled by the weapon. The person would either become the weapon's soul, or their physical body would shatter, or they would become an idiot. The triple door. Each door was more difficult than the last. Countless myth-ranked individuals cursed the heavens for being unfair to the final door. However, if one managed to break through, not only would they be able to become a semi-god, they would even be able to obtain a personal divine weapon that was customized for themselves. In the original owner's hands, this divine weapon could even surpass god equipment in some aspects, and their combat strength would increase exponentially. Marguerite had two myth-ranked weapons. One of them was the 10,000 spell tome, which allowed her to copy other people's spells. The other was the Philosopher's Stone, which had a nearly limitless mana reserve. One of them would be easy to deal with, but two of them together would be like a bug. Marguerite was capable of casually casting multiple forbidden spells. She would be able to cast double spells at any time in a direct confrontation. She had limitless mana, and when it came to long-range combat, she would be the archmage of an entire team by herself. She was truly shameless. Rather than calling them weapons, myth-ranked weapons were more like extensions of a myth-ranked individual's physical body. If a myth-ranked individual died, their myth-ranked weapon would be more like their remains than their belongings. Without the support of their soul and physical body, their power would naturally be greatly reduced. However, they would still be excellent weapons with many wondrous uses. In fact, there were even records of semi-god level individuals leaving behind god equipment after they died. I knew that at this stage, I couldn't have too much or too little. It had to be just right. Rushing at everything at this stage would be suicidal. Caution, experience, and repeated attempts were the only way to pass this stage. At the very least, that was what most people thought. As for me, I had already broken through to the myth rank before, and I had long since prepared my path of breaking through. In fact, I had already prepared more than 10 concepts, capable of carrying the power of myth. It was just that this step wouldn't be so easy to take. Chapter 547. More than 10? That's far too ridiculous. Just how many concepts have you prepared? That's the foundational secret of every myth-ranked and even semi-god. Did you really think that I'd tell you? Fine, I admit it. Even I don't know the exact number. My companion's expression of, "I've seen through you, and keep making up stories," was rather unbearable, so I told him the truth. For others, the most important step is to find a concept that can be converted. However, I've accumulated more than 10 concepts over 4 lives. What I'm worried about is something else. I don't know how many concepts are worth converting, nor do I know which concepts will eventually form a system. Nor do I know what my physical body's limit is. Indeed, since there were no precedents to follow, and I had accumulated quite a lot of concepts, I didn't even know how many myth-ranked concepts I would be able to carry, nor did I know my limit. Since this was a path that had already been explored by others, there would naturally be rules to follow. Based on past experience, every species would have different tendencies and limit. Going from myth to semi-god was just like a freight train crossing the ocean. On the other side of the ocean, everything would be accumulated in the past, but on the other side, the value would increase by 100-fold. The physical body's bloodline would be the only ferry. The power of one's bloodline would be equivalent to the material and weight of the ferry. If one transported too little, one would earn less or even suffer a loss. If one transported too much, the ferry would capsize and the goods would be lost. As I previously mentioned, there was no such thing as fairness in this world to begin with. Not only did a species' bloodline determine their starting point, it also secretly determined their ending point. In this fairy game, every species' fairy would be completely different. Demons used killing and devouring to evolve. Their entire bodies were in an eternal state of evolution. The so-called bottleneck was only because they did not kill enough and did not eat enough. It was meaningless to measure them by the level of mortals. Dragons and titans did not even know what it meant to be capsized. Not only did their natural bloodline power give them powerful natural talents, it also allowed them to grow rapidly. There was no limit to their growth. In front of the most ancient dragons, ordinary human semi-gods were nothing more than a joke. There were different types of elves, ranging from the bronze bloodline of the wild elves to the gold bloodline of the gold elves. However, they were of the same origin, so their racial characteristics were still similar. Superior elves would typically choose 2 or 3 concepts, while ordinary elves would choose 1 or 2 concepts. As for how many concepts the royal gold elves would choose, I didn't know, either, as Harloise was no longer a suitable example. However, my guess was that the gold elves had their own system just like dragons and demons. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called a gold species. According to this logic, if Harloise is able to break through the 3rd stage and become a demigod, she should be much more powerful than an ordinary new demigod. At the end of the day, humans are still the most miserable. They are congenitally deficient and have a short lifespan. Human powerful individuals had short lifespans. It would be extremely fortunate for them to be able to reach this level before their lifespans came to an end and find a single concept. However, their weak physical bodies meant that they could only choose a single concept to convert to. Those who dared to try multiple concepts were basically all dead. This was also the reason why human semi-gods were viewed as weak. Didn't Adam and Marguerite have multiple concepts? Actually, this was a path that others had taken as well. This involved another important concept, inheritance. When I have a chance to make a wish, I'll choose to make another wish. Since a human physical body is unable to accept multiple concepts, then I'll use the first concept to change my physical body's attribute. Perhaps I'll even transform into a non-human body. Won't that allow me to accept other concepts? I'll even be able to use this to obtain a longer lifespan and progress even further. It was impossible to say which insane senior had come up with such a method. Obviously, this wouldn't be an easy miracle to achieve. Converting to a physical body would require a tremendous price. Failing would mean death. But as long as enough experience was accumulated, a stable path of conversion and strengthening would be discovered. Compared to other species, perhaps humans are naturally weak and have short lifespans. Perhaps we're lacking in talent and potential, but we can inherit the experiences of our predecessors. Perhaps our lifespans aren't long enough, but we can record our knowledge and experiences into books and pass them on to our descendants. Perhaps we're limited by our lifespans and talent, so we're unable to reach the peak. However, our species will continue to advance and finally evolve to the peak. The path that our predecessors took was an inheritance. Adam's phoenix inheritance, which included the phoenix bloodline and phoenix heart, was slowly perfected by us as we adventured. Even the materials were painstakingly gathered. Being able to succeed on the first try was largely due to luck. Since all of the materials required the phoenix heart, and this was a powerful inheritance specifically chosen for Adam, his future path would be smooth sailing. In fact, he even had the chance to become the strongest human. It could be said that Adam Han was the creator of the phoenix inheritance. Marguerite's undying inheritance was a byproduct of the wise scholar's research on the philosopher's stone. It was a well-developed inheritance that could be directly exchanged for in the mage country. However, the most important material, the philosopher's stone, was something that could only be obtained by herself. However, the undying inheritance wasn't actually a high-level inheritance. It would only have a limited effect on magical power. Although Marguerite's youthful appearance was quite popular among women, it would be a waste to use a once-in-a-lifetime inheritance like this. Actually, Marguerite didn't need an inheritance to increase her power. She believed that she could obtain everything with her own two hands. The first concept was to choose the core component of the inheritance, which would be used to change the physical body to break through the human body's bottleneck and obtain a new physical body. The second concept was to choose a weapon to increase combat strength. This seemed to have become the most standard configuration. Of course, it would be far too much of a waste to only use this inheritance that he had painstakingly created just once. It seemed far too long and meaningless for his descendants to cultivate from scratch just to obtain a physical body and weapon. And so, the inheritance also included martial arts techniques, philosophies, magical theories, and so on. In the end, these inheritances naturally became heirlooms that were passed down from father to son, and from son to grandson. These heirlooms created powerful individuals that were similar in appearance. In fact, there were even titles like Dragon Hunters that could be passed down from generation to generation. However, their power levels would be on a completely different level. Of course, it couldn't be denied that this current situation would be quite beneficial in stabilizing the inheritance. Similar bloodlines and natural talents would also increase the success rate of the inheritance by a whole level. Obtaining an inheritance would be the equivalent of obtaining the complete accumulation and power of a senior who was at least at the peak of myth rank. Then, learning the senior's martial arts techniques would mean that it would be strange if one still couldn't rapidly grow stronger. Inheritances seemed quite high class, but there were quite a few people who came into contact with them at the lower levels. However, coming into contact with an inheritance that was too complete at such a young age would easily limit the inheritor's imagination and potential. But according to what I knew, many countries' royalty did such things in private. And a good inheritance would naturally be a rare treasure that couldn't be bought with money. Previously, I had caused so much trouble in the underground because it was rumored that the Eternal Night's scepter contained the secret of Emperor Yongye's power. What else could it be other than an inheritance? And for me, who was a double diamond bloodline arbiter in this world, my physical body's potential was far from reaching its limit. This was also the foundational reason why I was willing to pay any price to obtain a powerful physical body. I had already accumulated enough materials, and the foundation was solid. Now it was almost time for me to create something miraculous. Perhaps in the future, there would also be an inheritance called the Legend of Roland. My physical body was already nearly indestructible and had limitless potential. There was no need for me to search for any inheritance. But what I held in my hands was quite an important inheritance. Perhaps it could even be called one of the strongest inheritances in the world. But this inheritance was both power and responsibility. I held the silver battle hammer and chanted the words of pure holy light. Holy light surrounded the hammer, illuminating the surroundings as if it was daytime and as if it was a bright lamp in the dark. Ethereal figures appeared all around me, either valiantly fighting against enemies or defending my home. This was the battle hammer's memory, the inheritance of countless holy night. It was unable to change the limits of an ordinary person's body, but it could give the inheritor a will and spirit that surpassed that of an ordinary person. Not a single one of its previous masters had been cowards. I had no reason to let this inheritance end in my hands. I was unable to forget the history it represented, and so I picked it up. Let's start with this, the Light of Salvation, Hope Battle Hammer of the Light Envoy. Chapter 548. Renee had thought about it before. In fact, on the way here, she kept thinking about what she would say and do if she ever met Roland again. Would she be like a little girl who had been lied to, angrily questioning why he had lied to her and kept such an important thing from her? Or would she be like a resentful wife, crying about how she missed him? But neither of those seemed to fit her current style. She didn't seem to be able to act like such a little girl. It had been 7 years since she became the ruler of a country. She had experienced countless difficulties and troubles within her own country, abroad, on the battlefield, and in diplomatic situations. Those that could be solved with military force were those that could only be helplessly bowed to. As the true ruler of the Northlands, Renee had probably experienced even more than Roland had in the past. The tomboy had grown up. Her short hair reached her waist. At a diplomatic ball, it was the perfect curl for extravagant formal attire. On the battlefield, her dancing ponytail became one of her symbols. She was experienced in diplomacy and mature in social etiquette. She was an outstanding general and leader on the battlefield. In the Mist Alliance and within her own country, she was a dignified ruler. Her aggressive diplomatic attitude combined with the confidence of a rising mega-country actually helped the Mist Alliance become more and more influential internationally. Roland didn't choose the wrong person. He's always been much stronger than us in this area. Even Marguerite, who was picky and refused to admit defeat, had to admit that Renee was outstanding. Even though and was also doing quite well in the underground, she was still far inferior to Renee. Especially since Renee would always think of a way to run away whenever she was dealing with government affairs. She would always be in high spirits whenever she was dealing with military affairs or battles. She was obviously more suited to being a general than a politician. Renee was the most dazzling existence among the younger generation. The best rookie of the younger generation? No, the current Renee was already the most powerful and influential person in all of Ike. She was an existence equal to the emperors of other mega-empires. The Night Princess of the past had already matured. She had no choice but to mature. Childhood? Young girls' feelings? How could the ruler of a country have a normal childhood and adolescence? Her every move was the will of the country, and her personal likes and dislikes could determine the life and death of an individual or even an entire race. Love and such were things that no one dared to imagine. Let's face it, 7 years had passed. Considering that the average age of marriage in the continent was less than 18, Renee had long passed her wedding date. However, as the most powerful and influential woman on the continent, Renee still had countless suitors. Every time a perfect man appeared on paper, even if Renee didn't do anything, the man's past misdeeds, hidden ambitions, and so on would automatically appear in front of Renee. Tisk tsk tsk. Another scumbag who intends to conquer the world with his lower body. Perhaps it was due to Roland's excessive dislike of the dragon Autian. This name had a special meaning in this world due to Roland's nonsensical books. Her disgust of men and friendliness towards women formed a sharp contrast. Plus, with her past reputation, the Yuri princess had already evolved into the Yuri queen. That was why there were now many more beautiful women by Roland's side that he desired to conquer in order to avoid trouble and misunderstandings. The Night Princess, who was becoming more and more accustomed to treating strangers with a stern expression, mysteriously became known as the Iron Queen. Even Renée herself felt that it was rather funny. Actually, it was just that the somewhat muddle-headed, somewhat sly, and somewhat childish Night Princess had been forced to take on the heavy responsibility of her country and her people by a certain irresponsible person. Responsibility and honor forced her to grow up. Everyone's expectations and trust forced her to grow up. Back then, the little girl's yearning for the Prince Charming who saved the damsel in distress, after the accumulation of time, had fermented into something unknown. If she had to describe it, perhaps even Rain herself couldn't figure it out. However, she was clear that whenever she thought of the man who suddenly abandoned her and her country, she couldn't help but feel angry. At the very least, you should have told me. Am I that untrustworthy? But today, when he finally saw that familiar figure walking down the stairs from the upper floor, the memories and impressions of the past that had been beautified and strengthened by time overlapped with that sloppy-looking face. Many thoughts and feelings filled his chest. Wonderful, he hasn't changed at all. He's just a little more rash. Did he not eat? Wait a moment, that can't be right. When Renée discovered that she was more delighted than angry, she felt that something was wrong. When she saw that familiar pair of eyes sizing her up, even more chaotic thoughts surfaced. The Iron Queen's face mysteriously flushed red, as if she didn't dare to face that familiar gaze. However, Roland's gaze kept moving up and down her body several times, as if he was looking for any changes in her. Roland's gaze even lingered on her sensitive areas for a long time, which was truly rude. Renée was rather annoyed. Based on her increasingly violent temper, she should have kicked Roland long ago, but for some reason, she didn't know what to do. It was as if she was an elementary school student who hadn't finished her homework. Yet, for some reason, she was secretly delighted. Roland's voice hadn't changed, and his handsome face had become thinner but more mature. His gentle gaze was focused on her face, from Renée's perspective. His expression seemed to be hesitant and worried. Was he feeling guilty? "I'll forgive you if you apologize." The female knight who had just been filled with anger instantly became a little girl who was sulking with her parents. She instantly forgot her determination to take revenge a few minutes ago. Meanwhile, Roland, who had been hesitating for a long time, finally spoke up. That person of yours? He's also on our side? Beautiful girl, you've developed quite well. You're much better than my bean sprout. Nice to meet you for the first time. Please take good care of me." Before Roland could even finish his first-time meeting greeting, a familiar angry roar reached his ears. Heavenly punishment, heavy strike. In front of the enraged girl, time and space were nothing. As she waved her steel gauntlets, a pitch-black heavy punch suddenly descended from another dimension and flew directly at Roland. This brute strength came from a creature cursed by the gods. The frightening heavy punch shattered space itself. This unfilial child of the gods had now become Renée's power. The frightening speed and brute strength were impossible to dodge. However, the creator of this attack didn't have the time to be happy, because he was directly smashed into the ceiling and viciously embedded into it. Broken rocks kept falling from the ceiling, but there was no more news of that person. Nice hit. That was so satisfying. Another punch to the face. When someone was unlucky, everyone's reactions would reveal that person's usual personality. Roland was beaten up. The witch laughed, the black cat laughed, and the bald sword saint laughed out loud. Even the great engineer took out a megaphone and declared his delight. Anyone who was familiar with Roland would clap their hands in delight. Only the mercenaries and Catalina would be worried that Roland would be beaten to death. Relax. In this day and age, good people die quickly, while bad people live for thousands of years. As for this man, even if the world ends, he won't die. Timlad's explanation received nods of agreement from everyone. Even though Roland had been struck directly in the face by a divine sin, everyone still felt that he was fine. In fact, they even made it seem like they were celebrating a festival. Chapter 549. I told you that I was just joking to lighten the mood. Would you believe me? I would. Since you've always done whatever you wanted, of course I believe in your ability to do so. But it's useless for us to believe you. She definitely wouldn't believe you. Amelia was smiling. It seemed that not only wasn't she angry at my misfortune, she even felt quite relieved. I sat on the ground with my head covered in blood. Nobody cared about me. I was just like a holy knight who had been ostracized in an adventuring team. Only I knew how much I was suffering. Nobody cared about me, so I could only cast holy light on myself. Divine sins weren't easy to deal with. Divine sins would kill anyone you stepped on, and anyone you pinched would explode. My entire body was now covered in shards of my dragon-scale armor. If it wasn't for the fact that I had summoned my armor in time to protect myself, that punch would have likely turned me into mincemeat. Just now I had been proud of my armor's astonishing defense. I even believed that my armor was nearly invincible in the mortal plane. Since my armor's defense couldn't be broken through, it naturally meant that I was undefeatable. It wouldn't even be wrong to say that I was undefeatable. But my armor immediately shattered. Could it be that? Could it be that this is my retribution for shouting, "I'm already undefeatable"? It would seem that some things shouldn't be said, no matter which world we're in. Astria, were you really so bored that you made that line into a weapon of causality? Seeing that even Astria couldn't be bothered to answer such a boring question, I decided to cut the crap and focus on healing myself. Rays of divine light of healing activated my body's healing abilities. It was quite comfortable, but the situation was far from good. It seemed that my hatred for me was rather high. In another corner of the room was Renée, who was still venting her anger on the soul creature Roland. This soul creature that looked somewhat similar to me was crouching down while covering its head with its hands while glaring at me with a hateful expression. Is this a new type of undead creature? Can I take a look at it? Even though my head was still bleeding, I was still rather curious. Even though this creature was being beaten up, why did it seem so familiar, so handsome, cough, cough, why did it look so much like me? Did you pay a copyright fee to become so handsome after plastic surgery? It would have been fine if they had similar appearances, as I had seen quite a few shape-shifting demons before. However, it would be quite difficult for me to understand their familiar soul wavelength. Although I knew a little about spiritual creatures, as I had heard that archmages in the mage country had done research on them, there had never been anyone who had reached such a level. I remembered that Archmage Andro of the Sword of Arcane Magic had a spiritual servant in his mage tower. His personal magic, Andro's invisible servant, could be used to summon helpers in battle, as well as to do odd jobs during normal times. Many people were envious of this magic. Unfortunately, this was his exclusive trump card, and he never revealed any information about this magic. If I could analyze this spiritual creature and get the silly cat to help me, I might be able to restore it to Roland's illegal summoning technique. No insurance, no salary. Wouldn't he be able to sell his patents and wait for his fortune? He wants to dissect me. Help. Save me. The scene in front of him was like a horror movie. He was rolling on the ground under the trampling of the silver boots, and his face was twisted with fear. His voice sounded so out of place that it begged for mercy. It was very, very refreshing. However, I was even more curious as to why he would come to such a conclusion. Did I really look like a mad scientist? I was a good person with a bottom line. Dissect him? Do I look like such an immoral person? Every intelligent life form has the right to live. Although I'm indeed quite interested in spiritual creatures, I'll respect his right to live. I tried to explain myself, but it seemed that nobody believed me. You do. Bottom line? Morals? Do you have any? Haha, you're so funny. But today isn't the Lie Festival, so let's not tell a joke that nobody can laugh at. What was even worse was that, judging from the opinions of the people around me, not a single person actually believed my explanation. This was simply heartbreaking. Had my credibility been ruined just like that? Intelligent life forms have life and right to live. But this guy doesn't seem to be a life form, does he? In that case, what you just said was nonsense, wasn't it? Although you tried to explain yourself, you didn't promise not to dissect him? You're as shameless as ever. I respected the right to live, but you weren't a life form, so let me dissect you. That was the true meaning of nonsense. TSK, I was actually seen through. Still, since you were able to see through my tricks, scammers would always be the best at seeing through scammers' tricks. Harloise, you're just the same as me, aren't you? I didn't try to explain myself, because my magical pet, who was connected to my heart and soul, had revealed everything. No one would believe me if I continued to explain myself. I simply suddenly reached out and grabbed the talkative black cat on my shoulder, and then kicked it, causing this magical pet who had betrayed its master to go play somewhere else. Hey, look at my wound. I'm clearly the victim here, so why is everyone looking at me as the bad guy? If I was an ordinary person, I would have been instantly beaten to death. You deserve it. Why didn't you get beaten to death? You bastard, you're actually pretending to be dead? Why don't you really die? Renee shouted angrily the moment she opened her mouth. Her tone was filled with quite a bit of anger and resentment, as well as some sadness. I fell silent for quite a while. Based on my many years of experience, I knew that it would be best not to try and reason with an angry woman. Women like her had the ability to turn any problem into an emotional problem, and turn any situation into one where you wronged her or treated her badly. Hey, I'm not pretending to be dead. You can just kill me one more time and I'll really be dead. How would I know that you'll cry? That's right, cry. Harloise from the Northlands saw that I was lying down and pretending to be dead, and that she didn't even need to examine me before she directly cried. Even now, her eyes were still red and swollen, which meant that Renee was still too inexperienced. If it was Marguerite or Adam, they would definitely examine the corpse. Yep, Eliza would as well, Renee. He's mentally saying that you're too inexperienced, falling for his trap so easily, and that Eliza doesn't understand him as well. All right then, Harloise proudly said that everything she said was the truth, but definitely not the whole truth. She was quite quick at learning my tricks. Was this really my fate? I instantly tossed out my flying cat and then made a defensive stance. That punch just now had really made me vomit blood. If another divine sin smite hit landed on me, I really might die. But this time, Renee didn't listen to Harloise's nonsense. She hesitated for a moment, and then decided to vent her anger on a substitute. But just as I started to cast holy light on myself in boredom, I faintly heard a whisper that sounded like a mosquito whispering. You really didn't recognize me? Or did you completely forget about me? I suddenly felt like I had wronged Renee quite a bit as I watched Harloise kick her clone to vent her anger while listening to my reply. Considering that it was highly likely that the silly cat would betray me even if I lied, I hesitated for a moment before telling her the truth. Of course I recognized you when I saw your battle flag, but you already attacked. Still, Renee, you've truly grown up. You've changed so much that I didn't recognize you at first glance. The tomboy from back then has suddenly become a young lady. Perhaps I had guessed correctly for once. I could finally heave a sigh of relief as Renee, who was unable to hide anything from me, suddenly cleared up. Actually, what really made me misjudge her was the tremendous difference in power level between us. Renee's improvement in power level astonished me greatly. If we only looked at her power level, she was now even stronger than me. No wonder she was able to control divine sins. Tisk. As expected, the silly cat still needed to be taught a lesson. She didn't even try to hide her regret that I managed to escape. Did she really want to see her master become a pile of rotten meat in a can? Everyone, be more serious. They're still fighting. However, my reminder didn't receive any acknowledgement from the others. They all had relaxed expressions, as if victory had already been decided. The reason why we were so relaxed now was naturally because the overall situation had already been decided. Renée had finished her massacre, and no demons were coming up from below. The demons seemed to be afraid of her, as they directly blew up all the tunnels leading up. Judging from Timlad's messy equipment, it seemed that the demon army had been almost completely wiped out. The current situation was excellent. All I had to do was attack Timlad, and I would be able to win. It seemed that I accidentally said something forbidden again. I couldn't possibly be so unlucky. There's a high-energy reaction down below. It's a new demon. All right then, Timlad was indeed a professional at making things difficult for me. So you're a professional jinxer? Then, Harloise, you're a professional at ridiculing others? Chapter 550. Man proposes, God disposes. Man proposes, God disposes. This kind of nonsense had probably been said countless times, but according to the pace of the story's development, anyone who said such a line would probably die very quickly. No matter how amazing a scheme or plot was, it would fail for all sorts of random reasons if you were unlucky. For example, meeting some brat who just left the village. What, brats aren't scary? Ha, the wheel of fate always spins. Perhaps some brat working as a waiter in a hotel would become the main character of those legendary novels. After many years of analysis, people had come up with 3 rules for all schemes to fail. Kill the main character's father, master, or other respected elders, kidnap or steal the main character's beloved girlfriend, find a former genius to break off an engagement, and all 3 had one thing in common: offend the main character. Cough cough, it would seem that no matter which world I was in, legendary novels were all quite common. Yep, I've always been talking about novels. Although novels were sometimes stranger than reality, most of the time, novels were novels, and reality was reality. In reality, all schemes had a high success rate. After all, neither the plotters nor the executioners were idiots. Anyone capable of plotting a heaven-defying scheme would probably have a high chance of success since they were already at the execution stage. In order to ascend to the throne, a certain Marquis family waited for the royal family for 100 years, assassinated 4 potential royal members, and finally succeeded in ascending to the throne. Yep, I'm talking about the current San Antonio. Their crown didn't come from the right place at all. Did the major nobles in San Antonio not know how this crown came about? Did the previous royal family not take precautions? Actually, the royal family had long since known that Marquis Mr. was ambitious. They even knew how the other princes had died in accident. However, back then, the Mr. family had military power and the loyalty of 1/3 of the major nobles, so they could only watch helplessly as they slowly walked towards destruction. It was common to hear about a brat who saved a princess in distress and finally revived the royal family to become the ruler of a country, but never seen it in action. However, in those stories, the ugly and old villains would finally succeed in defeating their superiors, and then marry a princess of the previous generation and have several children with her. There were countless examples of such villains who took over the throne. There was no other reason other than the fact that the conspirators were usually very powerful. Their ambitions often stemmed from their corresponding influence and strength. The nobles were much more powerful than the royalty, so they naturally had the ambition to replace the royalty. There were very few nobles who still followed the original alliance and remained loyal. As a result, those conspiracies quickly became overt conspiracies. Today's rebels would become the new crowned king of the past tomorrow. The current civil war in the Sala dukedom was an example, but it was not an isolated case. In the past few years, There had been so many rebellions, assassinations, and civil wars that they could no longer make the headlines. Even though a few super-empires were still trying their best to restrain themselves, the smaller the country, the more chaotic it was. Simply using the Holy War as an explanation for the constant civil wars and rebellions would be far too naive. Judging from the Fairies and the Mist Alliance's information, there were many signs that other species and factions had interfered. A certain major noble would suddenly obtain a powerful god equipment. A certain domain lord would suddenly have several powerful archmages from another species under his command. A certain dukedom would suddenly have several beastman tribes join their side. A certain tactician would suddenly appear and greatly expand the military strength of a certain warlord. All of these strange news stories were quite common in the past few years. However, the following developments were even more common. It was either a domain lord who had increased his power due to the will of the heavens, starting to rebel, or a ruler who felt threatened and started to clean up his own faction. The Vultures of War expansion pack from the game's history had appeared before us in a different form: internal strife and noble civil wars. For the vast majority of countries, civil wars in neighboring countries during this period of time were the most annoying. If you didn't do anything about it, it would spread to you. If you did, you would immediately be accused of interfering with the internal affairs of others and invading others. Of course, some ambitious kings and dukes actually treated this as a great opportunity. And so, the flames of war kept burning, and the civil wars became international wars. According to what I knew, several mega-empires, including Bardi, Shilua, and San Antonio, had all secretly profited quite a bit over the past few years. However, this was the internal affairs of other countries, and outsiders were completely unable to interfere. This would be a calamity for a small country, but would it be a small matter for a major country? No matter who it was, this would be a mega problem. Wars that could only be won and never lost would expand a major country's territory. Not only would the royalty's status become more stable, but it would also benefit the domestic market, major nobles, and military. The major country's citizens would desire even more wars, and the citizens' desires would force the king and nobles to start even more wars. This would be the greatest problem of all. If this was a scheme of the Chaos faction, then I had to admit that it was done quite beautifully. A few powerful individuals in the wild, a group of non-human natives, a few evil cultists, a good weapon, some new technology, and a few bags of gold. As long as they were used well, it would be possible to cause a country to fall into internal strife with little effort. This would be using up the entire mortal plane's strength. The Solid Dukedom was the most obvious example of this. Internal strife between domain lords wasn't a change in power level. No matter who won in the end, the country's overall power level would be greatly reduced, and its population would be greatly reduced. There would be no such thing as a true victor. From an overall and long-term perspective, everyone would lose. Limiting the scale of internal strife? If a war really broke out, it wouldn't be so easy to stop. Not only that, it would be quite difficult to stop such actions. Ambitious individuals were quite common, and it all depended on whether or not they had enough power to support them. Were we supposed to inspect the domain lord's advisors and subordinates one by one? Were we supposed to stop the domain lords from working hard to increase their own power level? Considering the fact that the current feudal nobles had complete autonomy, this was something that even their own country's royalty wouldn't be able to accomplish. This wasn't the demons' style, as they would immediately start fighting. Instead, they were more like devils that specialized in disgusting people. It wouldn't be possible to see any results in a short period of time, but as time dragged on, it would actually weaken the entire human species. Perhaps it was the betrayal of some devil lords and the departure of the will of the Chaos Abyss that caused the remaining devil lords to change their usual neutral stance in the Holy War. They were now eager to show off their own standpoint and abilities. Alright then, this was the other main quest that I had chosen to stay in the Solid Dukedom. I had originally intended to see who was behind that marquee and see if I could find out anything. Although it was highly unlikely that I would be able to catch the mastermind, I could at least try. At the very least, I needed to know that it was those bastards from the lower planes who were causing trouble. TSK, my plans were all messed up, and I actually met with such a situation. Am I really the legendary death god? Whenever I go, something happens. Why am I so unlucky? The one who should be complaining about being unlucky is that Sky Tower spirit. He almost succeeded in becoming the undead tower spirit. If it wasn't for you, his 100 years of planning would have been for nothing. From this angle, the creator of the Sky Tower spirit could be considered an incredible schemer. He had started planning several 100 years ago and patiently waited until the Holy War began before taking action. He had used adventurers to take away the most important chess pieces, and then started the Undead War to kill the most important chess pieces, thus obtaining the independence of the entire species. But from the moment that an accident occurred, the Undead Emperor and Sky Tower Spirit's scheme was destined to fail. The only mistake they made was that they offended the main character, me. Are you certain that it was your main character's luck that caused this, and not your calamity halo? Those reinforcements seem to have all been sent here to capture you. I was rendered speechless. The undead calamity, which would have caused a terrifying disaster, had been stopped. The most important thing was that Amelia had arrived with the wood spirits, and it was all thanks to Renee that the adventuring team had been able to deal with the undead calamity. Silly cat, will you really die if you don't comment on this? I will. While the silly cat and I were staring at each other, someone finally couldn't bear to watch any longer. Everyone, be serious. We're at war. Even though I kept reminding myself that this was a battlefield, I was unable to be serious. The tunnel leading downwards was opened up, and the demons indeed came up. However, Renee blocked the way. She danced with her silver sword and her spear, and then there was nothing else. Blood, flesh, and swords flew everywhere. Even now I had yet to see a single complete demon. Renee has such fighting spirit. She's showing off her improvement. Right, did you teach her sword techniques? Tisk, only a gorilla would use such sword techniques. I didn't teach her. I wasn't blind, so how could I not see through the style of this sword technique? Indeed, I had taught Rain fighting styles and techniques before. However, this sword technique that was so honest in both horizontal and vertical strokes, which used instinct and perception more than reason, was something only someone as simple and crude as Carwin's would use. Although Renee's explosive power level was quite surprising, I doubted that the demons would be a threat to Renee. I could also take this opportunity to slack off and plan for the future. Yep, I planned for the future. I planned for the future of this ruin, as well as the future of this tremendous inheritance. In my opinion, since Amelia and her fleet had arrived, and we had gotten rid of the most troublesome conservation, I doubted that anyone would be able to let go of this opportunity unless two more main gods suddenly appeared. There weren't any treasures or gold coins here that would make adventurers go crazy over them. However, the trash we encountered along the way was actually hundreds of times more valuable than gold coins. Perhaps I wasn't a good engineer, but at the very least, I was able to infer a civilization's level of evolution from their creations and tools. Autonomous machines, artificial souls, all sorts of machine designs and structures that I'd never seen before, half machine and half undead creations, and spiritual creatures that were capable of mimicking other people's soul wavelength. This was far more than all of the Haletum generation's excavations combined. Could be called a mega harvest. Just this special dimension that allowed us to communicate with other dimensions would be incredibly valuable to the Chaos faction. Naturally, it would be valuable to us as well. If this information was leaked, it would definitely cause an even more intense civil war in the Solidukedom. Perhaps some major country would find an excuse to invade the Solidukedom. If we didn't think of a good method to deal with this, it would be too late by the time news spread. Perhaps it would be safer to keep this door open and have this ruin always remain in a state of war. While I was still hesitating over all these ridiculous ideas, the true owner of this ruin, Catalina, walked up to me as if she wanted to say something. Chapter 551. No matter which world it was in, the police, military, and other violent organizations would always arrive late. This wasn't just because of the storyline. It was because receiving information, reporting to the police, understanding the situation, and gathering their forces would all require a large amount of time. A well-organized organization, excellent training, and advanced equipment would be able to shorten this emergency response time, but it would be impossible to completely eliminate it. It could be said that the time it took for the police to arrive was a direct reflection of the overall strength of the organization. For the residents of Starwood City, the arrival of the kingdom's reinforcements, which they had been waiting for so long, was a good thing. At the very least, this meant that Starwood City was now safe. But when the reinforcements actually arrived, even the most good-tempered person would be filled with anger. After all, the battle had already ended for half a month, and the reinforcements had only just arrived. The reinforcements had even fought a battle on the way here, and more than 50% of the reinforcements had died. When the reinforcements arrived, they were all exhausted and injured. Their ranks were filled with stretchers and injured soldiers. Rather than calling them reinforcements, it would be more accurate to call them disaster victims waiting to be rescued. This was truly unacceptable. Get the hell out of here. Are you here to rescue us or to kill each other? Even Marquis Stanley is far stronger than all of you. Blood Spear Salima is protecting us, and what did your domain lord do? He colluded with the undead and murdered the royal prince. Everyone is in danger. The residents of Starwood City had such a strange welcome method that Count Debaron, who was leading the group, was furious. In fact, he even privately considered hanging a few mercenaries and civilians for saying such arrogant things. Those filthy commoners, if it wasn't for the fact that we were here to rescue you, we wouldn't have fallen for those traitors' ambush. You actually dare to talk back to me? Prince Roland's murder was still right in front of him. If he didn't handle it well, it would be a major problem. Debaron even considered using the excuse of hunting down the murderer to vent his anger. After all, according to usual practice, there would always be many more people buried with the royal family when they were murdered. But unfortunately, he couldn't do that this time. Not only were there human guards on the city walls, there were also short elves patrolling the city walls. Gigantic magical flowers and ancient war trees covered the entire city walls. The wood spirits were now in control of the entire city. If it was only the wood spirits on the outskirts, it wouldn't have been a big deal. However, the airships in the sky gave everyone an invisible pressure. If there were any lucky survivors, the ancient war trees that covered the sky at the center of the city explained everything. The Forest of Dreams sky trees? What are they planning to do? Sky-reaching wood was an extension of the wood spirit's mother tree. Only when constructing a wood spirit town would such a precious tree be planted. The wood spirits could use this tree to receive support from the Forest of Dreams. Regenerating wood spirits also had many wondrous uses that outsiders didn't know about. As the wood spirits became more and more famous, the sky-reaching tree, which had obtained tremendous results in the battle against the undead, was not only viewed as a powerful weapon of war, but the area where the sky-reaching tree was located was also viewed as the wood spirits' sphere of influence. The wood spirits weren't too far away from the Solidukedom, so of course Debaron knew what this giant tree represented. The shabby city in front of him had already turned into a fortress city. Furthermore, it was a fortress built by another country or another race. Invasion? This is a blatant military invasion. If he was a pure soldier, he would have drawn his sword to protect the country by now. However, he was trusted by the royal family to deal with such a big matter. He was more of a politician than a soldier. Why did they do it? Could it be that the rumors about the treasure are true? But even though he had so many thoughts and guesses, there was nothing he could do. At most, he could report his guesses to the Archduke. However, the royal family behind him would probably be unable to do anything either. This was the tragedy of a small country, especially a small country that was in the midst of a civil war or a world war. When the original order was shattered by war, the law of the jungle became so obvious and cruel. If the wood spirits really wanted to take a piece of land here, what else could they do apart from denouncing the wood spirits, who were in the midst of a civil war? Would the royal army, which was currently in the midst of a civil war, start a war against the wood spirits, who were strong enough to rival undead emperors? You're overthinking things. We have no interest in such a shabby city. Our peace-loving species won't actively invade. We've actually established a base here for another reason. A sudden voice interrupted Deberon's thoughts. However, this calming voice didn't make him feel at ease. Instead, he was terrified that his thoughts had been seen through. A short, black-haired wood spirit had appeared in front of him. Her small figure was extremely similar to that of a young elf. Deberon had seen such a young elf slave at a banquet hosted by a major noble from another country. That elf slave would be worth an astronomical amount of money to purchase this shabby little city. However, the wood spirit before him seemed incredibly weak, as if he could easily subdue her. Deberon didn't dare to do anything shady. After all, the average combat strength of the wood spirits was far above that of humans and ordinary elves. This seemingly young little girl definitely wouldn't be any weaker than a silver-ranked warrior. The wood spirit's gentle smile suddenly became sinister as a mixture of contempt and angry killing intent swept over Deberon. Could it be that you're also a despicable slaver? Or, what do you intend to do to me? Deberon didn't know how the wood spirit before him had seen through his dark thoughts, but he was truly frightened and hurriedly denied it. No, thank you for your support. I was just thinking about how to report this to the Archduke. Amidst the chaos, the black-haired wood spirit had completed her main mission. She gave an explanation for her species' actions in constructing a fortress, stating that the wood spirits didn't intend to invade, but that the situation was rather special. A dimensional door leading to the lower planes has appeared in the ruins. Large numbers of demons are pouring out, and the dimensional door is out of control. Damn it, doesn't that mean that this place will be conquered by the demons sooner or later? This wasn't good news at all. Deberon was already regretting volunteering to earn military merit. If the demon army suddenly appeared before him, what could his half-crippled army possibly do? Right now, he was already considering whether or not he should find an excuse to escape. However, he hadn't accomplished anything at all and had suffered heavy losses. Returning with his tail between his legs would be no different from dying in battle. Perhaps he would even get honor points and noble points if he died in battle. However, the wood spirit named Moo and shook her head. She didn't make the most difficult request for Deberon to make, to have his army station here to protect her citizens. Out of control means that both sides have lost control of the dimensional door in this area. Right now, the dimensional door leading to the lower planes has become a random dimensional door. Every once in a while, it's possible that a resident of the lower planes will be sent here. However, it's impossible for a large army to invade. In order to prevent these demons from harming Starwood City's citizens, as well as to prevent the demons from entering other areas, we constructed this fortress. This was a good enough reason. Deberon calmed down a bit after hearing that the demon army wouldn't be coming. However, he felt that there was something fishy going on here. However, with his abilities, it was impossible for him to tell if this was real or fake. With the solid dukedom's power, even if they knew it was fake, what could they do? Mu-En paused for a moment before continuing. Everything happened too suddenly. We didn't have the time to report this to your country's royalty. Please send our apologies to the Archduke. International diplomacy was very particular about the use of words. report and apologize seemed polite, but it was actually more than enough to simply inform Roland. Roland didn't care what Roland thought. That's right, I'm sorry for taking over your territory. What? You want me to take it back? Have you woken up from your dream? Saying sorry is already giving you a lot of respect. Building a fortress in another country, and in such an exaggerated and overbearing manner, was basically the same as grabbing Roland's neck and asking, "Do you admit defeat?" But Debaran secretly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this overbearing apology. This was the way that he was used to in a major country. If the wood spirit before him had really carefully explained himself, Debaran would have had to carefully consider the true meaning behind it. Of course, while he was relaxed, he probably didn't have the mentality of, "I can't do anything about this anymore, so I'll just leave it to the royal family to deal with." Perhaps he also had the mentality of, "I was so lucky that nobody blamed me for losing in such a major event." As for the rumored hidden treasures and ruins, he wouldn't give up either. He would send out his own spies and thieves, but he wouldn't need to consider a direct confrontation until he received more information and orders from the higher-ups. On a different level, his safety would be guaranteed. This was all for the sake of the wood spirit's reputation. As long as he was near this fortress, the Marquis rebel army wouldn't be able to continue chasing after him. What Debaran didn't know was that although the wood spirit before him didn't know how to read minds, there really was someone on the fortress wall who could. Debaran's little scheme had long since been exposed. Tisk tsk. Although it's basically the same as I expected, sending such a person to command the battlefield would be no different from sending soldiers to the undead if it weren't for the fact that they met us. I felt rather helpless. Although it was a good thing for us that the Sala government had sent out such a person, it would have been better to hope that Aichi would suddenly revive than rely on such an army to fight against an invader from another dimension like conservation. That might not necessarily be the case. Although Amelia has been thinking about herself the entire time, she's still a graduate of a formal military academy. She's quite skilled at commanding battles. As for being selfish, cowardly, and afraid of taking responsibility, aren't all nobles like that? Amelia didn't even try to hide her disdain for the nobles. It was as if she had forgotten that she was also a member of the royal family. Perhaps it was even more likely that she had long since stopped treating herself as a human. Amelia didn't even bother to hide her ability to read minds in front of Roland. She simply explained her thoughts as usual. In fact, she didn't even remember when she had been seen through. Originally, she had already mentally prepared herself to be distanced from her. After all, no matter how good of a relationship she had with those who knew about her, they would either run away and never meet again, or they would be worried that their secrets would be exposed and would even try to kill them to keep them quiet. Yet, Roland's reply was still fresh in her mind. It was a new level of understanding that made her wonder if Roland's brain was normal. What a convenient ability! Then when I communicate with you, I can open my mouth and don't have to worry about not being able to explain myself clearly. It saves me so much time and energy. Lies were meaningless to Amelia. The truth that Roland had told her back then shocked her even more than a seamless lie. He really wasn't worried about being read by others at all. In fact, he even saw it as a means of communication. Should one say that he was simple-minded or that he was open-minded? Even though he had a belly full of evil tricks and wasn't a good person, Roland wasn't worried about being seen through at all. While Amelia was secretly surprised by this trust, it also made her chat with Roland her favorite pastime. This feeling of being trusted and being able to say whatever I want is probably something I can only experience when I'm with him, and this time, while Roland was still full of evil tricks and plotting how to set up a trap for others, Amelia unhesitatingly became his accomplice. When will our real reinforcements arrive? Soon. Based on the distance, as long as he doesn't get lost, he should arrive in 3 days. In that case, should we make preparations? No, he's quite fast on foot, but he'll be lucky if he can arrive in 10 days. It'll be normal for him to arrive in around 2 months. And that's if he's too insistent on leading the way himself and listening to others. He's able to find us in 2 months. We're half a continent away from each other, so he doesn't have a terrible sense of direction. I get it. Amelia covered her mouth and chuckled. She had already seen Roland's epic journey across the continent in his instant memories. Looking at it from this angle, Captain Rollo really didn't have it easy back then. Yep, in the first month, I'll make him give up and admit that it's impossible for him to find the way. In the second month, I'll make him fly back even if he walks to the end of the world. I had a pained expression. This was all a lesson I learned through blood and tears. Having a terrible sense of direction wasn't scary. Having a terrible sense of direction who didn't look at maps or ask others for directions wasn't scary either. Having a terrible sense of direction who firmly believed that he was the best pathfinder in the world would truly make others feel helpless. Chapter 552. Even though most countries in the world were embroiled in war, the news of the undead calamity's defeat, or more accurately, the undead emperor's descent and defeat, still shocked the entire world. Fine, not that much, as this was only a small country's matter. Still, the Sala dukedom and its neighboring countries were quite shocked. When most people heard that an undead emperor had descended and been defeated, their first reaction definitely wouldn't be "good job," or "who did it?" Instead, it would be "what a joke, someone lied about military intelligence and his achievements." Or, a small group of undead falsely claimed to be an undead calamity and an undead emperor. That's not the way to make heroes and grind for glory. Undead emperors were incredibly troublesome. They were so troublesome that every time they appeared, they would be recorded in the history book. Not a single country or true god would have the confidence to face an undead emperor by themselves. For a small country, a dukedom whose name was so difficult to find on a map, to be able to defeat an undead emperor by itself was something that most people found ridiculous. Before their spies could collect all the information, the fairies had already published a detailed report of this small-scale, yet extremely intense battle. The things mentioned in the report made all the countries and churches wary. The wood spirits have moved out. That Empress Harloise has personally led the royal fleet into battle. It really is an undead emperor. Forbidden spells have destroyed an entire mountain range. The mage towers have detected at least 2 energy explosions at the level of a super forbidden spell. Legends say that there are ruins from the Halettim generation here, but they seem to be under the wood spirit's control. The surrounding airspace is now under the control of the wood spirit's royal fleet. Nobody can sneak in. God's descent? Is that person still capable of using God's descent? Didn't those theologians say that it's impossible for him to do so? So it's the God of justice and discipline. It would seem that his reputation will greatly increase if he performs a divine miracle and saves the people. Link is dead. It's the work of one of his night lords. Who is that? Oh, the prince of the Sala dukedom? Who sent me such trash information? What does his death have to do with my country? Among the many pieces of information, there were naturally those that caught people's attention and those that were not. The prince's assassination that had caused a huge uproar in the Sala Duchy was treated as trash information. Among the many trivial pieces of information, the one that caught people's attention the most was still a few simple words. Roland has returned. He defeated undead Emperor Conservation. It was just a name that suddenly appeared for less than 2 years, but suddenly disappeared from the eyes of the world for as long as 7 years. This name caused a great uproar. Undying, unpredictable, and the second greatest trouble from the Northlands. This was a name that no one would trust or be with him. Yet everyone would take him seriously. There were no secrets in this world that would last forever. Top secrets of the past would only become topics of conversation among ordinary people 10 or even 100 years later. My past identity meant that I would never be able to obtain the trust and friendliness of strangers, but I would be able to obtain everyone's attention. This time, he had suddenly appeared, and even used his victory over an undead emperor and her army to express his stance. Not only did he make his stance clear, which made everyone heave a sigh of relief, but he also proved that he was still as powerful as ever. Even those existences who had other thoughts would have to re-evaluate their own strength. Right now, the person who caused such a huge commotion was still leisurely waiting in Starwood City. Orange alert. A certain existence whose name cannot be spoken has given birth to the great stone sculptor's second child. Considering how the first child, a giant stone monkey, caused so much trouble not long after it was born, and when it was discovered that the giant stone egg is also that existence's descendant, all the residents of the Rainsa Mountains have fallen into a state of panic. There's already a wave of refugees. What the hell is this? I helplessly put down the fairy's monthly magazine in my hand. What was all this nonsense? I didn't understand anything at all. Was I already behind the times? Stop pretending. Your former subordinate is currently the greatest trouble from the Northlands. Do you really think that others won't know about your relationship with him just because you pretend you don't understand? Did you teach him? I was rendered speechless. When I had just returned, my intelligence organization had sent me the latest reports on the situation in Ike as well as the most important individuals. Yet, they had given me an entire room full of cases and wanted posters. This was already unprecedented in history. He actually ended up together with Ainslow and even had 2 children. Should I make up for it by giving him a wedding gift and a child's birth? I did my best to change the topic, but Amelia suddenly chuckled coldly. This is the stone mother Ainslow's second child, but I wonder how many hundreds of children Beifong has. Even a stone can't stop him. The monster creator and mother of all beasts definitely has a chance of reaching the top 5 of the calamity rankings. I should probably castrate such a disgusting creature the next time I meet him. It's useless. I heard that Beifeng's concept is reproduction. His strengthened myth-ranked weapon is his third leg. He's the greatest shame of all powerful individuals. He can probably grow another leg even if he's castrated. Let's find another dimension and seal him away. It seemed that Harlois and Amelia were quite dissatisfied with Beifeng's playboy style. They were actually seriously discussing how to get rid of a scourge for the people. As they discussed, they would occasionally glance at me from the corner of their eyes. Hearing the keywords playboy, castration, and so on, I felt a strange chill run down my spine. Let's talk about proper business. About the revivers. Let's not waste time on such a boring thing. Right, Teacher Harlois, I have the newest plant-based skincare product here. It's the new Enchanted Rose fragrance. Would you like to try it? Do you have one specifically for slimes? I like the ones that are especially oily. At least it's quite comfortable. Why don't you try it? I intended to change the topic of conversation that had long since gone off topic. However, my 2 female brethren turned around and expressed that they weren't interested at all. Theoretically speaking, Amelia should be the one with the most power here. But, seeing how she was so excited about chatting with Harlois and recommending skincare products to cats, although I felt that recommending a cat deodorant or flea killer would be more practical, I felt that I shouldn't say such things out loud and ruin their fun. I'm not interested. You can do whatever you want. This silence was also a form of attitude. Fine then, I admit that I was intentionally being optimistic. It was truly incomprehensible. From that day onwards, Harlois and Amelia's relationship suddenly improved greatly. Originally, they were just master and disciple who were using each other. Now they seemed more like good sisters. But they always had fake smiles on their faces, and they always spoke in a friendly manner. Why did I feel a chill down my spine even though I was trying so hard to disguise myself as a background? Reviver, I should focus my attention on a new race, the Revivers, a brand new race and term. At that time, Catalina encountered the mechanical souls that rebelled against the Founder's rule. They actually existed, but as heretics they were imprisoned in prison. When Catalina ascended the throne, they were all released. Yes, ascending to the throne. Although it was a little exaggerated, the bartender girl from back then was indeed the leader of a clan. Although her clan members were a little fewer, and her territory was a little smaller. The wood spirits would also toss Starwood City over to them once they matured a bit more. But even then, Starwood City's territory wouldn't even be as large as a count's territory. At this point, it was quite clear. The reason why we stayed here and allowed the wood spirits to forcefully invade Ike was precisely because we wanted to allow the new species to rise up. The new species were even more pitiful. Some of the new souls that rebelled against the Founder were reconstructed by the Founder, while others were tossed into prison to fend for themselves. Less than 100 of them were still able to move normally. As for the racist mechanical souls left behind by the Founder, they all agreed with the Founder's policy of racial cleansing. Who would dare to keep them around? If the Revivers wanted to expand their population without sacrificing the souls of the hibernating undead, they would have to try to awaken the hibernating undead. Tim Ladd was currently helping her with this, and he seemed to have found a way to do so. What? I forgot that the Founder was the final boss this time. Well, there wasn't much to say. He was nothing more than a tragedy. At this point, we formed a team to fight against the boss. Amelia would lead the team, I would provide cover, Renee would be the vanguard, and Harlois would cheer us on. Even a semi-god would be instantly defeated, not to mention a mage tower spirit that had been forced into a corner. The battle could be summarized as follows. The Founder summoned a demon army. Renee killed off the demon army. The Founder was furious, so he summoned an ultimate technique to summon the incarnation of a demon marquis. He then felt that he had a great advantage, so he said something along the lines of, "You're all suicidal." At the same time, the demon marquis recognized Renee and me. He began to loudly curse at the deceiver for tricking him, and also began to act as a bystander. And then, Renee instantly killed off the demon marquis incarnation that had raised its hands in the air. We happily sent him back to the Chaos Abyss, along with our friendly greetings of visiting his home. And then, Renee conveniently killed off the Founder. Yep, the boss was conveniently killed off as well. As a pure researcher, he had 0 combat strength to speak of. While this seemed like a happy ending, the trouble had only just begun. We were now faced with a mega mess, and as the person involved and the owner of this base, Catalina, had gotten herself involved in this mess. The very first words that Catalina said to me indicated that she was a qualified leader. We're going to join the Mist Alliance as a new, independent species. We'll have priority in selling our technologies and crafts to the Mist Alliance's members. Wow, this girl was far smarter than her father. She knew that she was a piece of juicy meat, and without sufficient protection, she would soon be devoured by a pack of wolves. So, she immediately found a shameless and famous person to protect her. The leader and former leader of the Mist Alliance were both present, so many things could be directly discussed. The Mist Alliance naturally wouldn't refuse such a tempting piece of juicy meat, which was why a new member appeared in the Mist Alliance. Currently, there were only several hundred revivers in the Mist Alliance. The wood spirits were quite friendly with each other. At the very least, before this new species could stand up, the airship fleet wouldn't retreat. Recently, the number of spies and scouts sent back to the Mist Alliance was in the triple digit. As for the dimensional door to the lower planes that was no longer under our control, it wasn't entirely a lie. However, we had kept it for other uses. As for the demons that randomly fell out of the dimensional crack, yep, those unlucky demons that fell out of the dimensional crack, if they didn't die on the spot, the wood spirits would be able to exercise a little. As I waited for the wood spirits, I also practiced my techniques in preparation for the upcoming battle. Chapter 553. The Black Tower was a pitch-black tower. This was the nickname that the Halettum Society had given this sky tower. It probably meant that they hoped that it would be able to hide from the gods and preserve the seeds of their civilization. And now, it was the only city of the revivers, and it was gradually being developed. From a certain standpoint, the battle against the Halettum Society's forbidden spell had done some good things. After the surrounding mountains were flattened, it would be convenient for the revivers to construct a new city. After clearing out the rubble, a line was drawn on the plains, and a row of wooden houses was built in the central area, a wall was erected, and a group of residents moved in. A new city had been constructed. The first 10 levels of the Black Tower had also been constructed and opened to the public. Several hundred of the Mist Alliance's greatest engineers were about to arrive. In this simple city, they would use this new knowledge as quickly as possible to improve the Mist Alliance's magical engineering technology. There was technology, a market, and a labor force. Perhaps this place would become the Mist Alliance's new industrial technology base in just a few years. As for whether or not the Mist Alliance would become even stronger because of this, it would only be a pleasant surprise for me since I was already half retired. That dimensional door that could connect to the lower planes had saved me a lot of trouble. At the very least, our upcoming adventure would be much smoother. Have you confirmed the number of people and the name list? I've already sent out invitations. I don't know how many will come. After all, that place is far too dangerous. Even a true god can die there at any moment. Since I was already intending to go to the Chaos Abyss, it wouldn't be a wise decision to go there for a vacation. Considering my rather bad reputation and my past experience of hunting demon lords in groups, it was quite possible that I would be hunted down by demon lords the moment I entered the Chaos Abyss. Although I had already prepared disguises and information, it was still possible that I would have to run for my life the moment I entered. Even if I was lucky and didn't meet any old acquaintances in the Chaos Abyss, nobody knew what they would meet in the next instant. Power was the only way to survive. Perhaps saint ranks would be quite amazing in the mortal plane, but they wouldn't even be worth mentioning in the Chaos Abyss, which was filled with demons. And so, I sent out some invitations and gathered some people. In the Chaos Abyss, the strong preys on the weak. Those who aren't strong enough are not only unnecessary, they'll even become a burden. The more experts, the better. Then why did you reject Amelia and Renee? They should be strong enough. Forget it, Heloise. You still don't know why I rejected them? Of course it's because, while I was talking about serious matters, the silly cat suddenly transformed into her human form. She lowered her head shyly and started counting her fingers. Even if you've made your choice, even if I'm the only winner, don't say it so directly. I'll be embarrassed. Renee's a demonkin. She'll be in a lot of trouble if she goes in. Plus, she's the ruler of the Mist Kingdom. She won't be able to leave at all. I ignored Heloise, who was in acting mode. Ignoring her right now was the best choice. Recently, she had been getting crazier and crazier. Amelia and Renee both wanted to come, but neither of them were suitable candidates. Amelia was the mother and creator of the wood spirit. Corrupting her would be the equivalent of distorting the entire wood spirit species. If she enters the Chaos Abyss, the moment she's discovered, the demon prince or whatever will probably come personally. That wouldn't be a helper, but a problem. Although the Chaos Abyss had almost no restrictions on the upper limits of one's power, and it wasn't difficult for the true gods to descend upon the Chaos Abyss, unless they wanted to commit suicide, the Order gods wouldn't use their true bodies to enter the Chaos Abyss. There was once a true god who was foolish enough to personally descend into the Chaos Abyss, and then a series of events happened. That true god became a chaos evil god. The Chaos Abyss was just that evil. Corruption and depravity weren't just descriptions of personality. Positive energy and negative energy were also purely different stat. Chaos was capable of distorting any ordinary creature's intelligence and physical body. In the chaos abyss, distortion and chaos were the most common dimensional laws. Even an order god could be completely distorted. In the end, I'm the only one who can accompany you to the chaos abyss? A 3-month honeymoon trip to the chaos abyss, along the river Styx to enjoy the scenery of Inferno and the demons outside the cage. You'll enjoy a passionate chase and escape. Your interests are truly strange. Adam and Marguerite will be going as well. What are you thinking? 2 married couples traveling together. I was rendered speechless. As expected, it was spring. Were all animals in mating season? Was it even possible to speak like a human? The silly cat pretended to be serious again under my hateful gaze. However, the ancient scroll she was opening in her hands attracted my attention. This was a map of all the dimensions in the chaos abyss. There were countless markings on it. This was also her recent job. The coordinates of the chaos abyss were the 77th level of the chaos abyss. Just like most other dimensions in the chaos abyss, this level was ruled by a powerful demon whose name I had never even heard of before. Perhaps his direct superior was Sophocles the Deceiver, but since we were the ones who controlled the dimensional door, it wouldn't be a problem for us to pass through. After all, nobody would expect that a barbarian from the mortal plane would voluntarily enter the chaos abyss. 2 travelers were traveling through the endless night. Astonishing gusts of wind uprooted the rocks on the roadside, but the wind was unable to move their gray cloaks, nor was it able to stop them from advancing. Ha! Do you think that Roland is out of ideas for us to help him? Adam's fiery red hair and hearty laughter made him seem as cheerful as ever even though he was in dire straits. Ever since he received Roland's letter, he laughed at how Roland had admitted defeat and asked for help, while Adam immediately set off. I'm actually quite interested in where we're going next. Are you sure that we don't need to ask for directions? Ha, my intuition tells me that it's not too far away. Intuition? Not too far away? Heh. Marguerite chuckled coldly. Behind her, a group of seals and penguins were currently running on an iceberg. The 2 of them had already been walking on an iceberg for 3 days now. Blizzards, hailstorms, polar storms, avalanches, and so on were all natural disasters for ordinary people. But for these 2 semi-gods, they were nothing more than interesting things to experience. How did they get here? Helen didn't know either. Originally, the 2 of them had been aimlessly wandering around the continent. After receiving Roland's letter, Halent had only followed Roland as he excitedly charged through one mountain range after another, following the guidance of his intuition. In less than half a month, they had reached this place step by step. No matter where Roland had originally agreed to meet up, it definitely wouldn't be here. As far as the eye could see, there was nothing here apart from icebergs, glaciers, and all sorts of frigid creatures. TSK, it doesn't matter. Since he wrote to Adam instead of me, it's probably not that urgent. In that case, I'll just treat it as a vacation. I looked at the compass in my hand. I was already as far north as I could go. I then used a sextant to measure my latitude and longitude, confirming that I was in the Northland's Bizar archipelago. This was the backbone of the world that was even further north than the Northland. Roland's sense of direction had already surpassed the so-called going south to go north. This was the equivalent of going to the bottom of the ocean, but instead going into space. Halent calculated his current location. Even though he knew that he was far off course, he suddenly became interested. At this time of year, we should be able to see the aurora together. It'll be quite romantic for the 2 of us to look at the aurora together and count the stars together. Let's go a bit further north. Since we're already here, we can also do some experiments in extreme environments to gather data. Halent's thoughts came to her, and she decided to go further north. It seemed that Roland would arrive later than Roland had expected. It was likely that by the time Adam completely admitted that he needed someone to guide him, the only people by his side would be polar bears and penguins. Look, that big white guy over there. He's a local resident, isn't he? Heh, are they welcoming us with ice cubes? How welcoming. How about we stay over at their place tonight? Those are snowmen and ice trolls. They're quite skilled at throwing ice spears and ice cubes. They're already surrounding us? It seems that they intend to treat us as dinner. All right, we'll stay over at their place tonight. Hopefully, there'll be a place for us to take a hot shower. Meanwhile, in the underground's Dragon City, the letter that Roland sent over still hadn't reached its master yet. That was because the master of Dragon City was currently sleeping soundly. As for when he would wake up, considering how inconceivable the dragon's sleep cycle was, it would all depend on luck. Meanwhile, another companion who hadn't been invited was excitedly rushing over. However, Roland decided that he didn't want to see her. At any rate, although he had made the decision to gather his companions, those that he wanted to come didn't come, while those that he didn't want to see were waiting. Roland would have to wait a long time for these unreliable companions to gather together. Chapter 554. From a certain standpoint, the opponent before me was probably the most troublesome opponent I had ever faced in the entire world. I took a deep breath, then turned around and ran. What? Good for nothing? If I couldn't defeat him, wouldn't I just be waiting for death if I didn't run? But under his pursuit, even escaping was not easy. What brushed past the nape of his neck was a whistling sharp sword chi. What followed the angry roar was a solid killing intent and a storm of sword chi. His black greatsword didn't have any magic power on it, but its pure brute force was enough to tear through the sturdiest of tower shields. His violent swing seemed reckless, but it actually sealed off all possibilities of dodging. I can't escape. My veteran instincts instantly came to this conclusion. The next instant I turned around and swung my sword. Asterisk clang. Asterisk my ice sword and black greatsword clashed against each other. As I was sent flying backwards, I was delighted to see Amelia's greatsword shatter into pieces. The difference in the quality of our weapons seemed to have given me the goddess of victory's favor. Ha, is it fun to chase after me? Eat me. I swallowed my presumptuous words halfway through my sentence. My horn for counterattack had just been blown when it suddenly stopped. In front of me, two black greatswords, one beheading and the other chopping off a leg, both chased after me. I could only lower my head and roll around, but a broken sword suddenly appeared in front of me. The broken sword's blade stabbed straight into my left eye, yet the owner of the broken sword had a calm expression. Stop. Amelia's angry command was instantly accepted by the management system. The three spiritual creatures instantly stopped, and I could finally take a breather. As expected, is 2 culus my current limit? 3 culus is too dangerous. I should train at 2 culus instead. There were 3 identical spiritual creatures in front of me. Perhaps their faces were identical to mine, but nobody would be able to mistake us for each other. Even though they had identical facial features, Amelia's eyes were filled with ambition and vitality, as if she was constantly burning with fighting spirit. As for me, I suddenly understood why Cavendish had been so popular back in the day. Silly cat, what's in my eyes? I waxed. You forgot to wash your face today. Tisk, as expected, I couldn't rely on this stupid cat, so I looked towards Amelia. Although you look the same, your younger brother seems much more spirited and upright than you. Even if she didn't mention it, I knew how to evaluate him in the past. My father always said, Roland, you're still sleeping. But when it came to Cavendish, it was, which family's daughter did you hook up with again? That's right, the spirit creature before me was a duplicate of Carwin's. The so-called 2 cards, and 3 cards, referred to how many copies of Carwin's they would be able to deal with. It was a pleasant surprise that I could create a training field that could create a spirit clone. It was incredibly troublesome to find someone to practice swordsmanship on in this map. But now I only needed to press a few buttons and provide some energy to find someone to practice swordsmanship on. This was a wonderful thing. As for why I was using Cavendish, it would be better than if I were using Cullis. I could. There was a limit to the equipment. At the very least, that copy of Roland's swordsmanship was only half as good as mine. The more familiar someone was, the more similar their swordsmanship would be. Still, it seemed that the imitation would only be about 70 to 80% of Roland's swordsmanship. However, the imitation style was quite similar, which was quite suitable for training. I had experimented with all the sword saint duplicates in my memories. Most sword saints, including Adam, I'm too familiar with him, weren't difficult to deal with. That was because most of their swordsmanship was based on their unique abilities. It would be enough for them to reach the sword saint standard of being able to release sword energy. If one only looked at their swordsmanship, they wouldn't be strong at all. The Chaos War God's clone was quite strong, but the clone was far too large and unsuitable. In the end, no matter how many times I tried, I still ended up using that bastard's clone. The experience that Cavendish's swordsmanship clone had obtained mainly came from the two previous wars, the War of the Northlands and the War of the Hades. He hadn't fought many times, but he was able to copy most of his swordsmanship. In a way, I actually lacked experience fighting against him. His swordsmanship style also astonished me. Even though you're brothers, isn't your swordsmanship styles completely different? Didn't you both learn from the same teacher? Indeed, it just so happened that both of us had been taught by the same teacher. Both of us had been taught by the Mist Kingdom's royal sword saint. Our foundational swordsmanship was our foundational swordsmanship, and then we added my style to our long battles. Both of us were the same. If I wanted to find out the root of our differences, it would probably be due to our different understandings of swordsmanship. For me, swordsmanship was foundationally no different from other physical technique. It was simply a technique for using the body. It was a pure technique. Perhaps it could be improved into philosophy, but in the end it was still a technique for killing people. This was also what most sword saints understood. That was why when they obtained an undying body and special abilities, they would often create a set of swordsmanship techniques that would allow them to utilize their special abilities, becoming a different kind of magical swordsman. It was precisely because of this understanding that I used swordsmanship most of the time. Sometimes I could also play around with hammers or spears. Perhaps I was influenced by the Eastern philosophy of infusing emotions into swordsmanship. My swordsmanship was filled with my understanding of all sorts of things. There was logic everywhere. Every sword strike and every set of swordsmanship had a goal. That was why my swordsmanship didn't seem to be based on emotions. Instead, it was filled with all sorts of traps and deceptions. Sometimes it would be a direct attack. Sometimes it would be a strange curve. Sometimes it would be a violent burst of speed. But the ultimate goal was to confuse the enemy, spy on the enemy, find out the enemy's weakness, tire out the enemy, numb the enemy, and then find an opportunity to kill the enemy. As for Cavendish's swordsmanship, it seemed to be direct and unflashy. His swordsmanship was filled with savagery and killing intent, as well as casualness. Indeed, it was quite inconceivable. Even though he had clearly grown up in the chaos abyss through slaughter, his swordsmanship seemed to come from instinct. Great wisdom may appear foolish, but he never deliberately pursued killing power or efficiency. Yet, he would never miss a single opportunity to kill his opponent. His swordsmanship was bold and unrestrained. Every slash and stab seemed completely random, but he would always appear at the most appropriate location. Cavendish's swordsmanship is quite perfect. His swordsmanship is fast, but it's not extravagant at all. The biggest headache is that he always appears at the most critical location at the most critical moment, as if it's some sort of instinct. Perhaps only endless long-term slaughter would allow swordsmanship to evolve into an instinct, a combat instinct that would allow him to swing his sword and kill at any moment. Yet, this instinct was actually able to see through my scams. When I was fast, he was fast. When I was slow, he was fast as well. When I was slow, he was fast as well. He turned the tables on me. If I attacked directly, he would attack me back. If I used fancy moves, he would directly attack me. Perhaps our swordsmanship was about the same, but he would always attack where I felt the most uncomfortable. His timing was also incredibly accurate. It was as if he was my natural enemy. That was why I was at a slight disadvantage when we first fought. But after I got used to it, it became much easier for me to win since I was just a soulless clone without a complete swordsmanship from the Chaos Abyss. That's great. I haven't even passed a single level yet. Not far away from me, Renee was being forced to run around and jump around by a single Cavendish clone. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore and kept making a fool of herself. She summoned a divine sin fist to kill the clone. Then, she glanced at me enviously before summoning another clone, and they started fighting again. From a certain standpoint, Renee was indeed much more mature than she had been in the past. At the very least, if this was the young girl from before, she would have probably started slacking off and running around everywhere. Do your best. If you're a man, you can last for 30 seconds. Barton was in a much worse situation. He didn't have any random locations. Even though his grandfather was constantly cheering him on and buffing him with spells and buffs, it was still quite difficult for him to fight. He only had the strength to fight back. But thanks to all the timely calls for him to stop, no one died. All the Sword Saints, including Renee and Barton, were still unable to do anything to a single clone. Of course, they were still unable to defeat Ilua using only swordsmanship. In my plans for the future, even though there were many concepts that could be used as weapons, swordsmanship was a core element in the power system. Now that I had a rare opportunity to improve my swordsmanship, how could I possibly let it go? So what if I had a natural enemy? Even a mouse could eat a cat when it grew up. If I had the chance to practice more with a natural enemy, I would probably grow even faster. Considering that only Sword Saints would be able to accept such a test and require such sparring, this was probably the most extravagant training ground of all. Not necessarily. And then, the silly cat tossed out an incarnation. The cat incarnation summoned a Pekingese and started fighting with the Pekingese. It was actually possible to play like this? Perhaps in the memories of the slime cat incarnation, Pekingese were the natural enemy. Will you die if you don't make fun of me? I won't. Then can you tell me that you've been training day and night without rest for the sake of improving your swordsmanship, and not to deal with that clone's main body? I was rendered speechless. Perhaps even if I didn't say anything, everyone would know that the most dangerous person in this trip to the Chaos Abyss was my useless younger brother. Relax, I'm confident. Confident that you can win, or confident that you can escape. I glared at her. As expected, word games were no longer effective against her. However, she couldn't always make fun of me and affect everyone's morale, right? I'm confident that I can run faster than you when escaping,